Alright. Believe we are live. I apologize to people that I personally texted that I'd be on air at 8:30. My cat was crying up a storm at my bedroom window, loud enough that I could be heard over my mic. So I had to pick up his fat ass, throw him in the corridor, and now he's banging on my bedroom damn door like it's his fucking personal property. So if you hear a cat crying in the background, it's just me neglecting my pets. I guarantee it. No, he's a little asshole. He's an outside cat, but when he wants in, he'll straight up just like SWAT team, just assault your door. He has his own pet door on the other side of the house, which is he refuses to use because the kittens uh, basically spawn camp him there and immediately start dicking with him, which I can understand that, but yeah, cat drama. Anyway, so if you hear weird noises in the background, that's what that probably is. All right. You like the backdrop? I animated it myself. That's why it looks like crap. Anyway, so tonight is a very special night. If you remember from the last live stream, if you want to take a look at the small reaction video I did about Star Wars and a plot hole involving the Ewoks, uh, that's a standalone video. It's on my channel. Like I said, he gives his hot take, I give mine. I think both very valid, very good points, very diplomatic, very respectful. It's like not trying to start crap with this individual. It's just, I disagree. Oh, Reginald, I disagree. Drive-by arguments. Anyway, but yeah, I think it was Drunken Banthas is the name of the channel. He does a lot of Star Wars analysis. Very, very good channel. I like his stuff. But I found myself arguing with the short he posted, and I'm like, why argue here to myself? I could bitch about it on lawn, and then you get to hear about it. I made it your problem, internet. Anyway, so as per last live stream, we got rid of that smelly old Republic, that first Republic, that sort of speed runs failure. Just name a problem you have with like a Republic in the real world. They suddenly go batshit crazy. They become autocracies. They start selling their votes to lobbyists. It's like you name it. They did all of it in the span of less than 20 years. So much so, their own constituents started hunting down their representatives in the streets and murdering them because they were just so sick of them just acting like a small monarch. And of course, most voters just seem to go on autopilot, and yeah, so that's how you get an autocrat. Voters not paying attention, and dipshits in charge who refuse to do what they're told because they are a public servant, not an autocrat. But the people wanted something new and different. Something that had never been tried before, at least not in Panjian history. It had been tried in our history, in ancient Rome. It was originally called a triumvirate. Now, the Roman triumvirate was basically a band headed by Caesar. It had a point man and basically two lesser autocrats or oligarchs, however you want to see them. It very much was a political popularity contest. The triarchy is something new and different. It is more like three monarchies combined in that it is ancestral and heraldic in that you have family crests and you have titles passed down from generation to generation. And just like in a monarchy, they are your oldest son becomes the new king. However, there are interesting rules around this because they wanted it to be very civil. They didn't want to have to resort to murdering their triarchs in the street, so they had an out clause. First and foremost, the triarchy, any triarch individually can be given the black spot. That is a referendum of the plurality of people, so 80% of the population of Eusolices, as per last census. And yes, they did keep censuses at that time. Because the texts are texts, the autism is strong, they're going to write shit down. They basically just go around neighborhood to neighborhood with a big fat book, and people put their name on it, and they either give a black dot for get rid of them, or leave nothing to say, I'm okay with it. So, that's where the black spot comes from. And although that comes from voting out a pirate captain Allegedly, there's no real historical evidence they ever really did that. Usually, mutinies involved, killing the commanding officer and putting your guy in charge. Uh, it was very civil, and it was a form of democracy into the system. But it's more like an emergency escape hatch than like a doorway. You use it when you need it. You don't just go, you know what? I didn't like that policy that the Triarchy did last year. That personally slighted me and affected me. That's why you need a plurality. You go to your neighbors and you say, hey, I don't like this policy they instituted. And they go, really? You kind of sound like a pisser guy because everyone else really likes it. Yeah, it's just you. So, the Triarchy also has rules about challenging individual Triarchs. Just like in the tourney system, you can challenge each individual king to single combat and essentially, theoretically, take over their role. However, no one's ever done that. You also have to remember the Triarchs are not stupid. They're not going to come out there, and fight you like mano a mano with nothing owned, like, Queensberry rules for the crown. They're going to be wearing a full suit of armor. So if you come, you better become to like take on a walking tank, because that's essentially what you're going to be dealing with. And there's a pretty good chance, especially if you're going after, say, someone like Gowan II, who we will touch on his reign towards the end of this, unfortunately, because you gotta. It's like the good villains in the Spider-Man comic arc. It's like they always want to go straight to Carnage and Venom. They are later characters. You got to get through Rhino and Shocker first. Sorry guys, but the cool villains were towards the end of the story arc. Just like with the Triarchy, the cool kings came later on. That being said, I need to put this preference right now before we start talking about the individual rulers and what they did. There will be a Triarch we discuss who has the surname of McGowan. Remember, in my universe, Micah is short for Mick. McGowan, so it's descendant of Gowan. Sort of a play on the Gaelic pronunciation of that, which would be originally like Mac would be son of. And Gowan in Gaelic means blacksmith. So son of the blacksmith. Just because this character bears my last name does not mean it is insert character. I have 3 insert characters. There is Gowan the Great, who started all this bullshit. Gowan II, who we're going to meet towards the end of this. And the Super Soldier Doc, aka Oka Dakata, the Greatest Magician. Those are my only insert characters. That's why they look like me, they sound like me, and but they don't necessarily act like me. That being said, the point of this character is to point out there's always a bad apple in every bunch. There's always got to be some ancestor who like ruins it for everyone, and then everyone tries to use them as a negative example from that point on. And you're going to see that with the other old families, not just the one that bears my last name. That being said, for legal reasons, I gave it these characters my last name so that I could avoid lawsuits, essentially. Because there's going to be some dickwad who says, oh, you wrote this about my family. See, this happened at this time, and this happened at this time, which is very similar to what happened to my family in its ancient history. And I'm like, nah. The problem is that being son of blacksmith, there are a lot of sons of blacksmiths around. There are a lot of McGowans around. We're not directly related to all each other, but that's still the last name. So, that being said, this is a fictional character. Any correlation between these fictional historical events and real historical events are purely your schizophrenia. Do not take this as literal or some sort of like backdoor confession or any of that shit. This character just happens to have that last name because that's how family lineage works. I couldn't have like a random Triarch who's like, oh yes, I am, Lord Falkrod for like no fucking reason, even though McGowans have traditionally held this spot for hundreds of years. I'm going to have some rando just come in. I guess I could have him like win a duel against a McGowan, but then that would cut the McGowan line, and then it's like, no. It would cause too many retcons and continuity errors, so it's like, no. Sometimes you just have an ancestor that's an asshole, and you got to deal with that. So, that being said, The first triarchy was Glaine McGowan, Victorious Kulk, and Drev Kulik. And they were called the Sons of the Great Ones. And I do have a little list I'm working off of here so that I don't ramble too much. If my phone... Yeah. The first triarchy basically had to establish a lot of rules. They were the ones who came up with the idea of the democracy out, also tourney system in. Basically, you could become a triarch by killing a triarch. You could get rid of a triarch by voting them out by plurality. The people really, really liked that because it gave basically a check and a balance where previously, they would vote people in and then they would just never seem to get voted out for whatever reason. In this case, because it is a plurality, you can't ignore that. That's a big fat book full of names. So, and the people were very excited about this. It's like, hey, we've never done this before. We're very excited for this new triarchy. And in spirit of trying new things tonight, been looking at this at the liquor store's beer barn for a long time, and I finally bit Chicago Old Style by Hellmann's. Hellmann's? I have no idea how you pronounce that. But the fact it's called Old Style, and it's from an old city like Chicago, it just seems very fitting for talking about early Ulysses. Because eventually it becomes a mega city. It's a very large city. And that would be our beverage tonight. Interesting. But good. Anyway. Also been looking at this at the local humidor is Leaf by Oscar. And it looks like I'm holding up a turd, but this is actually a cigar wrapped in its own tobacco leaf. So I'm going to open that up here. And yes, I will be smoking this in just a minute. Deal with it. I have my door hermetically sealed and a large fan going in the background, which you might be able to hear through my mic. May not be able to. Depends. So that tobacco covering, I guess theoretically you could smoke it, but it's very, very crumbly. So I think it's a bit too dry to like roll up and smoke. But it is wrapped in its own tobacco leaf. Ah, here we go. And there is the finished cigar with rain. When you're at a humidor closet, don't sniff the cigars. Don't do that. That's a chooch move. First of all, you're not going to smell any damn thing. It's sealed up. This one you might actually could smell it. When that's because of that wrapper. That's the same tobacco that it's wrapped in. That is the filler is made of. It smells really good. So let's it's such a large diameter. I might want to cut it. I've got a little cutter here on the back of my there we go. Just clip the tip. Alright. And you like to rotate it, heat it, rotate it. No. God, that cat. I swear to God. Slide a little bit more. You can't really light a cigar like you light a cigarette. It doesn't like initially ignite. It's just tobacco. There's no Philip Morris in there to help it light, if you know what I mean. So sort of like starting a campfire, got to get going. That is very pleasant. I was not expecting that. It's very, very, very mild. Anyway, so not sponsored by either one of these. It's just I wanted to try them and share that with y'all. It also relaxes me because, again, this character coming up that bears my last name, when I wrote him, I'm like, I really don't want to make such a controversial character with my last name, but it had to happen so that every triarchal family had something staining them. Alright. So, under the first triarchy, they said they had to establish some rules. Another rule they came up with, which is brilliant, is you don't ascend the throne when your father dies. But traditionally in monarchies, when the king dies, they pretty much just, wrench the crown off his corpse and give it to you. It's like, here you go, you're king now. That's not how it works in the triarchy. With the triarchy, you retire like any other job, and you become a king. You become a position known as king father. And a king father still lives in the palace, is still referred to as sire, but he has no power. The power is transferred officially, publicly, and then documented officially to your heir, the heir of the triarchy, the Prince of Eusoleces, who then becomes a sovereign. And that's what the triarchs refer to themselves internally. They are a sovereign. Now, if you've read Revenge of the Forsaken, you know that the texts deal in silver because they have a surplus of it from Mount Zirid, which, again, is the mountain like Fuji that overlooks the whole valley and the city. Silver coins in Eusoleces, the name of their currency is called a sovereign. One sovereign is basically 1 troy ounce of silver. So it has like the buying power of, I think last it was like $49, $50, somewhere in there. So you could do the math, and I try to keep the economics in Revenge of the Forsaken accurate, because I know there's going to be some nerd out there who's going to be like, wait a minute, there's no way that costs that much. Again, Leaf by Oscar, very nice. It's not quite a Gordo, definitely Robusto by the shape of it. The King Father basically has no power. And that is sort of the point, is that you don't have to worry about your descendants assassinating you to gain the throne. One day you're just going to be too old, and there's going to come a time where there's sort of a soft coup moment where your heir and the other triarchs are going to be like, man, we've been noticing you've been forgetting things lately. Addresses, people's names, and we can't have that, man. You're in charge. You're one of 3 people in charge of this nation. Like, you got to step down to King Father. If you rebuke that, they have the right to ask you again in 1 year. If you rebuke it again, then they could put it up to popular referendum. It's like, hey, basically put a triarch on trial for essentially incompetence. And if it's proven that they are senile or just otherwise insane, it legally gets transferred through the court systems to the new triarch, who would be your heir. All very diplomatic, all very legal, no bullshit, no, being assassinated by your heirs type of crap, like you see in Game of Thrones and other fantasy novels like that. That's all fun, but it doesn't make for a stable government. A stable government has to be civil. If it isn't civil, then it's just barbarism. And that's part of the problem that happened with Rome, in my opinion, is that it stopped being civil. When you start assassinating your political rivals, that's the downhill slope. And you're slotting. Alright, now, shit. These fatter cigars do not like being steady lit. And yes, I'm going to commit the blasphemy of relighting a cigar, because this thing is $15 fucking dollars. That is an expensive ass stick. So, the triarchy, again, laid out the purviews. Again, I mentioned it before. The McGowans have control of the courts and the military. The Kulaks have control of civil affairs, civil planning, infrastructure, and the civilian police, the civil enforcers. So the inside cops, not the outside cops. That's why ranger enforcers are under the purview of the McGowans. They go out of the city. Their jurisdiction is everywhere that isn't inside of Eusoleces. So that would be townships, technically bailorment, but bailorment has declared itself its own country, and they have every right to do so, considering, well, they were kicked out and no one wants them. So they're kind of sovereign unto themselves. But of course, Ranger forces do not care. If there's an outlaw there, they're going to, kick over your fucking hovel and find that bastard and behead him. They don't care. Because that's their job. They are the left hand of the Triarchy. Now, when did the Triarchy start becoming a mafioso assassin machine? That's a little bit later. Right now, they sort of focused on consolidation of power and legitimacy. The Triarchy had to seem legitimate and fair, otherwise people are just going to reject it. And a lot of people did reject it at first. They wanted to just form another republic, to which they were met with, what's the short definition of insanity? And of course, everyone colloquially knows that. It's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It's like, right, why would you want to replace a failed government with the exact same type of government? Go out, I'll wait. Yeah. It's the same argument like communists make. It's like, oh, we'll get it right this time. So, that's why they went full gung-ho with the Triarchy. To us, it sounds absolutely batshit crazy. To the techs at the time, it's like, well, it's better than nothing. Because the techs feared anarchy, because they know anarchy always devolves into a barbaric monarchy. Because eventually one piece of shit rises to the top of the piece of shit pile. And then they declare themselves king, and then start, oppressing downwards. Shit rolls downhill, as it were. They've seen this time and time again. The techs are a very old people. Very ancient. They've seen it before. Alright. So, where does this Triarchy live at this time? Because the palace / the Capitol building, as it will later be called, didn't really exist yet. Well, originally there was a great hall, just sort of like the halls of fellowship you see in the Troc Commonwealth. A big old meeting hall, like a town hall, where everyone gathers to discuss things. Before, that was the floor of the Senate. Now it's kind of a big empty building that's kind of useless, because the Triarchy just needs an office where they meet, and then offices individually to reconnoiter and requisition and just generally do paperwork. Again, the bureaucracy and paperwork of the Triarchy is one of the reasons it was deemed so legitimate, is that the Senate that they replaced didn't write a damn thing down. Everything was handshake deals behind closed doors, and if you try to call them out on these deals, like, that didn't happen. I don't know what you're talking about. And that's why, part of the reason why they speed ran failure is that there was no transparency, there was no accountability, and especially there was no duty to the constituents. They eventually became autocrats. They just did whatever the hell they wanted. The bureaucracy took off like a UFO out into space. Much like the scientists who portrayed the techs early on. It's like, oh, well, we are just going to do our own thing now, and you just have to deal with it. Now, this great hall was cut in half. One half became the courthouse, and it was then subdivided into smaller courts, and Glane was responsible for that. He's like, we need a civil court and we need a criminal court, and then we need a high court that you can appeal to above them. As I mentioned before, there was no appeals on the trial court. This high court was for like really bad crimes, like mass murder, terrorism, things that have not been done yet on this new planet, Hazaya. Like, there might be a murder or a rape or arson every once in a while, but for the most part, the techs are pretty chill. I mean, unless they hear you own slaves, then they're very not chill. But we're going to get to that. So, the other half of this building became the first public school. And it was free. So basically, they got together, the Triarchs, and okayed a first draft of a unified textbook teaching reading, writing, math, what little science they knew, uh, and what they call speculative science. In other words, science they believe to be correct, but they can't prove it because they're so primitive now. Things like heavier than air flying machines are real because that's one of the things we came here to this planet on, was a heavier than air flying machine. But damn if we know how to make one or fix the one that's currently, lawn darted into the ground, a few hundred miles that way. And unfortunately, speculative science gave way to a little bit of quackery at this time. You would start seeing crackpot doctors calling themselves mentalists. Some of them claimed to be psychic. Others claimed that they weren't psychic and that psychics are not real. So it's Schrodinger's psychic. They mentalists were both psychic and not psychic at the same time. Psychic powers exist, but you go down the street around the corner, there's another guy with an office claiming to be a mentalist saying, no, psychics are bullshit. In my universe, they are real, but they're very rare, and at this time, because they're not practiced, not very good. They're kind of shit. That old style is growing on me. I'd like to shout out to a friend who recommended that. Now, the School of Ulysses, for the most part, has had a very good reputation for scientific accuracy because they don't want their kids to be stupid. See, our school system trains children to be obedient to a system. Mainly, it kind of devolved into pretty much baby prison at this point. Their school system has never been like that. Their school system is very, very matter of fact. It is about education, not necessarily indoctrination. However, as you saw, if you may have seen with the city volume, it's number 5, I believe, of Revenge of the Forsaken, they go to public schools so that Korra can see what a public school day is like. And Fearsome Cockerel, of course, is basically, as he says to the king, propagandizing the children, trying to make Ranger enforcement sound cool to the kids, so when they grow up, they want to apply to the Marshall Academy. Or maybe even sweet talk their parent into applying to the Marshall Academy right now. To be clear, there are adult classes for the Marshall Academy, and they're usually held at night. The infamous night school is what they call it. And nowadays, mostly it's off-world security teams and bodyguards and bounty hunters who go there. The very prestigious daytime school is pretty much only for indigenous techs and trocs and old money families who, one, can afford the tuition, and two, they come from multi-generational Ranger Enforcer households. So day school is still like you see in Revenge of the Forsaken, where you literally, your kids go there with a backpack with a sword and a gun on it. Although nowadays it's just knife fighting and long guns are at it as well. Not to mention close quarters combat with both. And they still are issued a letter of marque after graduating, although that's still up to the Martial Masters. The Martial Masters can deny you a letter of marque, which basically means, yeah, you're a trained assassin, but we don't trust you to execute that in the best interest of the will of the people of the Tech Nation. In other words, you're a scumbag. It's basically, it's essentially that's how you should take that if you are rejected the letter of marque. Basically, that means we're not issuing you a license to kill. And like I said, after going for 15 years to the Marshall Academy and essentially growing up there, for them to turn around and say, "Yeah, we don't trust you with a letter of marque," that's a low blow. A lot of people have to be escorted out of the building, like with armed security, after being denied. They've only had a handful of washouts for ethical reasons, but they do occur on occasion. And what they're trying to do is trying to not create another Bandit King. Because Div Rennick was old school money, his family was rich, and they wanted that damn tuition, and they knew that he was a little psychopath, and they trained him to be an assassin anyway. And that's how you get one of the worst terrorists and pirates in history, is you train a little psychopath to be a trained assassin. And then, unfortunately, because of political and social pressure, they gave him a letter of marque. He then went out hunting with Fearsome Cockerel, and Fearsome Cockerel dropped a dime on him that, hey, he's stealing our marks' personal effects and pawning them. To which Gowan II was like, what now? Like, we pay you guys handsomely. You don't have to. Why? So he calls in Div Rennick to his office just for a little chat. It's like, hey, why are you pawning your DWs, your death warrants, your outlaws, personal effects? To which Div immediately gets defensive and says, it's not against regulations, sire. That's not the way you answer that question. Gowan II is like, he leans in his chair. It's like, Ranger, I set the policy that you're referring to. And I'm going to ask you again, why did you think it was appropriate to pawn the personal effects of a person you made an example of? And basically, his answer was, I did it because I could, and because there's no regulation against it. And if you punish me for doing this, you're just going to come off like a tyrant. So that conversation went south real quick, because Gowan II does not like feel like he's cornered by one of his people that work for him. You're basically still an employee. Like, you can be fired in more ways than one. It's important to note that although Fearsome Cockerel told Cora that he was expelled, he actually was not. Expulsion, if you remember, was outlawed. But here's what he did. He went to Mama Eos, Lady Eos, the Queen Mother, the mother of the late Queen, who still lives in the palace and is very well cared for. She does not live in a hovel in Bailorment, where she was sent to for asking the question of, is Voss a murderer? That was the question that would get you expelled for blasphemy. And Gowan II says, I've got a ranger who just butted heads with me over policy. And she's like, oh, well, what did he do? So, well, he's acting like a damn pirate. He's taking personal effects of his hunts and pawning them for personal profit. And Lady Eros is like, well, if I don't know about you, sire, but that sounds like something to get expelled over. And I'm like, milady, you have the power to expel people yourself. I mean, your title is not honorary. You are the Queen Mother. And furthermore, you are under the purview of my crown because I married your daughter. So you're part of the family. So I'm going to ask again, are you sure that this guy should be expelled? Now remember, the promise he made to get rid of expulsion wasn't to the people of Bailorment. It was to his bride and his bride's mother. It was a wedding gift. So basically, he manipulated this old lady into saying, yeah, expel that fucker. So they did. He did not get entered into the official book of expulsion. You'll not find Div Rennick anywhere in there. They did not give him the tattoos, but they did run his ass out of town, and they did point him towards Bailorment. Now, legend has it they put him in a Hezion's nest, which is sort of like a beehive. It's basic. Think like a thrush's nest. It's a big, like, again, more like a beehive. It's got a little hole in it. I drew a picture of one as they ride through Bailorment. And they closed off the entryway and allegedly shot him out of the city with a trebuchet. Now, later in the Revenge of the Forsaken, spoilers, Cora is doing a book report on the Bandit King. And the report is about false history and finding the truth from actually talking to people who were there. It boils back into their future job as being ranger enforcers. It's about tracking people down. It's not necessarily about learning history, but it's put in the format of like a book report. So she interrogates her father Cockrell, and Cockrell's like, "Yeah, I misspoke. He wasn't technically expelled. He was run out of the city, though." And then she recounts what her schoolmates say, which is that he was shut out of the town with a trebuchet. And Cockrell just started just laughing his ass off. It's like, I wish, but no. He was basically beaten and thrown out at the edge of town and told to go to bailment. And then, because Cora is Gowan II's favorite ranger, next time she got within earshot of him, she said, "Sire, I'm doing a book report about Div Rennick." And she didn't dare call him the Bandit King in his presence, because you don't fucking do that. There is only 3 kings in this land, Cora. But she asked, "Did you trebuchet his ass out of the city?" And he's like, "No, I threatened to." And then someone probably heard that, and then that's how that rumor spread. It's like the likelihood of him dying on impact would be very high. It's like, I didn't want to kill him, I just did not want him to be a ranger anymore, and I did not want someone who thought that way to be a part of society anymore. And she's like, "Oh, okay." And that was the end of that. But, going back to the public school of Ulysses, they teach critical thinking like that. The Martial Academy, again, is in the format of tracking someone down and finding out what happened to them. The public school of Ulysses would be more like doing a book report on a recent historical figure and interviewing people that knew them. So basically, Cora was doing the same thing, but with the slant of ranger enforcement as their future occupation. Whereas a teacher at the school of Ulysses would have just put it more like a book report. But they're essentially doing the same thing. You're having children go out and like talk to their elders and find out what happened, versus what everyone thinks happened. Now, the school of Ulysses was eventually moved, but for the longest time, it was in that same shared building next to the courthouse. The problem is, infrastructure-wise, if you're bringing criminals into one side of a building, or suspected criminals, sometimes convicted criminals leaving outside, you don't want school children near those people. So a lot of parents started saying, maybe we should build a separate school somewhere else, because population's growing, the courthouse can remain where it is, at the center of town, but we don't want our kids near, potential criminals, or convicted criminals especially. So the Triarchy was like, sure. So they commissioned the building of the first school of Ulysses, which had capacity for about 100,000 people, or children, I should say. And of course, you see that in the maps in the beginning of Revenge of the Forsaken. It's far on the other side of town, so they wanted to get it as almost like malicious compliance, as far away from the courthouse as possible. Now, the Triarchy changed hands for the first time under this new system of retiring. Glaine's son, Galvin, was a bastard in every sense of the word. He was not married to the woman who bore him a son, Galvin. Galvin basically was a love child. He also was a raging psychopath. And the King Father, Glaine, did not realize this until it was too late, and he had already been coronated, and Glaine died of old age before he could really step back in and correct him. So the other Triarchs kept trying to rein in his crazy, but he would just sometimes run roughshod over them or just circumvent them through other means. Now, if you showed up to the court of Galvin McGowan, you're not going to get a fair trial. You're going to get whatever the hell he feels like that morning. So if he didn't have his, say, morning cigar and coffee, you're in for a bad time. Even if he can't convict you, he will purposely have his prosecutors dredge up past shit you've done, which may or may not be illegal, simply to publicly shame you. No one leaves this court without being punished. He had publicly stated. And people were like, that's not really due process, though. That's not really justice. That's not how that works. That means the accusation is the crime. But he was a fucker who just agreed with that sentiment. If you were dragged before my court, you obviously have done something wrong. Even if it's not the thing you're immediately being accused of, I will find the crime to prosecute you over. And then I will determine how to sentence you. So, thus began his legal reign of terror. But because he had purview over the courts, let's just say crime dropped dramatically on the streets of Ulysses. And to this day, even though the courts are way less punitive than that, he created a standard of justice that was so draconian and so spiteful that no one really wanted to land their ass in court. So everyone just walked with their ass cheeks clenched and a smile on their face and obeyed the law. Because if you didn't, you're not getting a fair trial. Now, the other triarchs, Brent Kulik and Goljan is how you pronounce that. A lot of people have things like they spell like a French, like Gohan or like no, it's Goljan. Think of it as two different words: Gol, Gol, and Jean. But his friends would just call him Go, like the game. It does not exist in this universe. Just saying, for your benefit. Basically, because it was his purview, the courts, that is, the other triarchs really couldn't do a damn thing about it. And they could pass laws which would restrict prosecution to just the crime that is at hand. They tried that, and Galvin basically would just ignore that. He also instructed his magistrates, which are the highest judges in this legal system, usually are appointed. Sometimes they are voted in. It depends on if they are a specialty magistrate, like her fearsome majesty Okami, at least you see in Revenge Forsaken. She is a fearsome majesty, so she was a ranger enforcer who became the magistrate in charge of enforcement. Basically, she is the woman who makes sure that you bring the right head home, and that if you did not bring the right head home, that you are held accountable for murder because you brought the wrong head home. So, there is accountability there. There is a structure. There is a hierarchy. Now, if you're a regular civil or criminal magistrate, it depends on each block or each bureau later on. At this time, they were all appointed, but later on, each constituency is usually a block. And a block in Ulysses is 1 cubic kilometer. And I say cubic because there are underground parts of modern Ulysses, subterranean levels, like a hive city. And there are people who they call troglodytes who just live underground. They're mostly like shut-ins, gamers, antisocial people, people who just don't want to socialize. There are like facilities to go there, a third place, as the Japanese like to say, that isn't your office or your workspace or your house. Now, living subterraneanly is a lot cheaper, but of course it comes with a lot of problems. Flooding is a real bad issue. Unfortunately, so are infestations of, say, like cockroaches or the equivalent, because you're underground. Then there are people who live on the street level, as in ancient times, and then people who live in high rises who are above that. There are blocks and Usalices that are above street level, and they have their own representative, as crazy as that sounds. In order for a block to have its own representative, it must have at least 100,000 people living there, registered. If it does not, it gets rolled into the next block numerically before it, and then it becomes so as a super block. And then that kind of becomes sort of like electoral vote. They get a representative that wields a lot of power. But that's in the modern republic. Back then, none of that shit was going on. You had blocks for, identification and address purposes. But at this time, they especially if you live towards the outer parts of Usalices, like say in Forcer Manor, you just have a street address, like a person who lives in like the United States. You don't have a block and then a sub-block number and then a level and then an apartment number. Usalices addresses are based on the Japanese block system, so they're kind of convoluted, but they're very precise if you know how to read them. Now, the problem, again, with Galvin is that he is sadistic, and, again, he has the show me the man, I'll show you the crime mentality, and he is the highest judge in the land. That's a problem. That's a problem that the Triarchy could not get around, because that's his purview. And it was making the Triarchy look tyrannical, even though the rest of them are like, Galvin, please, stop. Just stop being a fucking psychopath. And he's like, no. Make me. Because he knew it was his purview. He has absolute authority over the courts. Thankfully, he didn't do anything crazy with the military. He never was interested in the military. He thought it was unnecessary. He believed the Trox were more likely to fight amongst themselves than try to invade Usalices, which at that time, that's pretty much correct. However, interesting about the Trox, what are they doing next door? What's happening on their neck of the woods, as they would say? They are consolidating into basically a corporate archy. They kind of literally are like a benevolent version of Mussolini's fascism. They have corporations that are led by barons. They're multi-generational, not like robber barons. They have a charter of ethics for their company. And the longer you work for their company, the higher amount of voting stock you get. So eventually you could work your way up to replacing the Baron. And then the Baron will just retire and keep that title. But usually they leave the company to, just like with a monarch, to their child, which is called a magnate. And then the magnate takes over, and then you, along with the other workers who have been there forever, basically become the board of directors and can veto them. That is actually who's in charge. Are these massive corporations that make things. And even back this day, you had factory owners who made specific things. You had Tetric Tools. They make tools out of iron. They were founded about this time. They started out as just a little blacksmith shop, but because they deal in bulk and they have roaming salesmen to sell to the farmers, you're going to find a Tetric Tools axe or a hoe in every barn because they make it. They make a lot of them. They make them good and cheap, and they'll ship it right to your house. So, basically, what I did with the Troc Commonwealth is, can you make a corporate archy that isn't screwing over the people? And the answer is yes. You just have a charter limiting their authority and power, just like a constitution. And these charters are very basic. It's like, don't do unpatriotic shit. Don't sell out the Commonwealth. Don't sell out your employees. Don't mistreat your employees. Very basic things. Now, back to Usalices. So, Galvin upped the ante after the third intervention with the other Triarchs. Let's call it an intervention. It's more like a forced conversation. And just to fuck with them, he reinstituted torture, death by torture. something that has not been a sentence that a judge could levy since thousands of years ago with the ancient texts, who are the people known as the Tay. Um, and like even King Technos, like 10,000 years ago, would not be so punitive as to torture a man to death for committing a crime. He would just simply have them killed. And furthermore, itching to try out his new weapon, as it were, against decency and justice in general, he was shown a man to court who was obviously mentally deficient. He didn't quite understand what was going on. He stole a loaf of bread from a bakery, and his handler, his brother, was not present. And so he was, of course, stopped, arrested, and he fought with the cops because he doesn't know what's going on. Galvin was shown all of this. His brother, the handler, was there, and he sentenced him to death by torture for stealing a loaf of bread. Even though he's technically non-compos mentum, they should have the proper sentence that he should have levied is pay for the bread, or I'm declaring your brother here as a ward under your care and a non-compos mentum, so that this won't happen again. And basically what that means is if he ever gets arrested, he'll get arrested, but if you bring that document saying he's non-compos mentum, we can't really prosecute him because he doesn't understand good from bad. He doesn't understand what's going on. That's not what happened, because Galvin is, again, a sadistic bastard, and he was trying to stick it to the other Triarchs by making a random example out of this guy for stealing a loaf of bread. And yeah, I am kind of referencing Les Miserables in that one. I actually had just got through watching it for like the second time. Damn good movie. The one that had, God, was it Liam Neeson? I can't remember. The more modern one that was done in like the 90s. Still a damn good story. But I just wanted to sort of like tongue in cheek nod at that. Is like what would the most punitive punishment I can imagine be for, like, shoplifting, essentially. It was like, oh, death by torture. It's like, there we go. So, unfortunately, this man was tortured to death. Thankfully, it was not in public. But the early press got around to it. Now, here's how the press worked in these days. They didn't have a lot of paper because they still using parchment. Parchment's expensive. But you know what's cheap? You hire a bunch of teenagers to memorize the news, keep it brief and simple, and go around to different blocks and Eusalices, townships, usually by the aquifer water fountains that they would use, and the bathhouses there next to them. And they would say, tell me the news, and they go up to it and say, tell me the news, and you give them a sovereign, or it's actually more like a quarter sovereign, it wasn't that expensive. And he'll literally just tell you the news. And of course, you don't make a lot of money doing that. It's not the same as selling a newspaper, but it's essentially the same process. It's just you're using someone's memory rather than using an actual piece of paper. Eventually, these criers were replaced with newspaper boys, essentially. And they would go around handing out, selling newspapers. Get your paper here, that sort of crap. But they didn't have the ability to mass press paper at that time, because paper was very, very valuable. Basically, only the Triarchy and the courts used parchment for anything, and they were always for official records. You can make your own paper, but it's going to be kind of shit, and it's not going to be like modern paper. So, everyone knew about this, and everyone disliked this. Like, no, do not torture, non-compos mentum individual to death for shoplifting. That's not cool. So the peasants were revolting, as it were, and they came to the courthouse, and they demanded to speak with Galvin the Bastard, to which he said, piss off, essentially, from a balcony window. Specifically the one that would be on this side of the building. This right here that I'm recreating is the later addressment perch of the palace. So this is actually sort of like 20 feet in the air. And a lot of Triarchs would pace up here. They can be seen smoking and talking to each other up here. It's kind of like an outside patio. But you could shout up to a Triarch. They're approachable. Like you can say, "Hey, sire, what is your opinion on this?" And a lot of times they look down at you and they'd be like, I don't know. I've not been briefed on that yet, citizen or subject. I'll get back with you on that. What's your name? What's your agency?" And they would come back with an official statement on that later. But right now, it's like, I'm having a smoke. Like, piss off. And to be clear, they would smoke inside the palace at this time. They did not give a rat's ass. Now, hold on, I gotta click off some things. That was the first nail in the coffin for Galvin. There was a riot that had to be expelled inside the courthouse. It was called the Judicial Riot, and they only refer to it as that nowadays because everyone knows what the hell it was about. The courts have gone mad, and they are sentencing people to be tortured to death. Now, normally, when you get convicted by a magistrate, as in today, your next of kin your victim or your next of kin have a say in how you should be sentenced. Now, it's not final say, and this is because of the fact that most people would say, "Oh, just kill him." It has to be an offense of a capital nature to get the death warrant, to get the death penalty. And then the magistrate has to agree with it. And basically, the quickest way to get a death sentence in Ulysses is to show no remorse whatsoever. And even publicly state, "I'll do this again. Want to watch me do it again? I'll do it." But even then, some magistrates were a little more forgiving than others, and they would veto the next of kin's right to say, "I request that this person be put down." These things do not want to stay lit. Now, the Judicial Riot was expelled by warders. They were the first set of warders. And before this, the warders were like court bailiffs. They would deal with criminals, make sure they don't hurt anyone in the jury or do crazy shit. They also would make sure that the next of kin and the accused families were always separate seated in either side of the hall, and they never interact with each other because they don't want someone to like start a fight in the damn courthouse. Now, the warders had never had to deal with a riot before, so they kind of got their ass kicked in because it was a large, angry crowd riled up by the press. Rightly so, mind you. This is the one time the press is in the right. It's like, this should not be allowed to stand. The people need to know about this, and they should be outraged by it. Sorry, it's finishing off a little bit of Bush Light from earlier. The nectar of Iowa. So, Galvin thought about, just for a second, maybe I should have some personal guard. Now, here is where the Triarchs were slick. In order to hire personal guard, well, you can't have personal guard for just one Triarch. That's bullshit. It's got to be for everyone. The other Triarchs said no. We see no reason why we cannot walk these streets freely like any other subject. What they're essentially saying to Galvin is, we deny you protection from righteous indignation of the people. In other words, what you get is what you get. If you're going to be a tyrannical dickbag in your own courts and stonewall us out of any say in that, if someone decides to Julius Caesar your ass, that's on you. And it's gone out again. God. It's a very nice smoke, but damn, it does not want to stay lit. Again, it's Leaf by Oscar. 10th anniversary. And again, I'm having to do the chooch thing and relight it. Sorry, cigar guys. But between talking and doesn't want to stay lit. Now, so the Triarchs at that time basically just handed Galvin a self-made death sentence. They're not going to okay the funds for personal guard. Most techs will see him in fucking oblivion before he pays them for personal protection of just some dude off the street. So good luck with that. Like, your reputation is trash, buddy. Even more so when it started leaking out to from secret sources within the palace that he had been psychologically and physically abusing his two daughters, Zyrus and Rish. Hold on. Now, it's important to note that there is no evidence of this. This was literally sources say sort of thing. But a lot of modern historians in Ulysses credit this as the first coup by the press. A red spot by bad journalism, basically. It's one thing when you're mistreating criminals, giving them harsh sentences they don't deserve. When you are accused vaguely of abusing your daughters physically, and there was hints that even sexually. Again, no evidence. This is inside sources say. Galvin was a dead man walking. He was denied personal guard. No tech would protect him in the streets for any amount of silver. And now he has been essentially labeled, as modern lexicon puts it, a chomo. You're dead, buddy. You're fucking dog meat. So, one day he was in the Central Market. People were shunning him. Even clerks would not sell him things. So he was getting a little frustrated. And he publicly proclaimed, "I will not be shunned in my own city." And that really pissed off the public, because Triarchs don't own Ulysses. The Hazaeans do. They let us live here. Lest you forget the giant crows that live in the woods next to us. It's like they're very nice. They didn't peck us to death when we landed here. So, that enraged a group of young men in the courtyard of the open-air market at that time, of the Central Market. Central Market is still there, it's just domed over with glass. Very nice. Very safe. No shoplifters, no muggers. The techs don't put up with that shit. However, he was slowly surrounded by a group of young men who were open carrying daggers, because you're a free subject. You could bear weapons in Ulysses. It's perfectly fine, as long as you don't do anything illegal with them. And if you draw your weapon, it better damn well be in self-defense. But in this case, it was not. They cornered him against a building, Galvin, and he turned around and saw this group of men huddled around him, probably less than 6 feet away from him in all directions. His recorded last words were, "What?" in an annoyed tone. Like, "What the fuck do you want? Go away." He was stabbed multiple times from multiple different angles. In fact, some of the people stabbing him were so enraged they accidentally stabbed each other by accident. And some of them could be heard openly apologizing to each other. This happened in the year 530. The duarchy that resulted from this, because Galvin did not have an official heir, and his two daughters were too mentally unstable to take the throne from years of abuse by him in private, that they had to just sort of limp along with the duarchy. Now, the duarchy addressed the people, and they're like, "Okay, we get it. Galvin was a bastard," and they meant that in the derogatory sense and the literal sense. And that is why, to this day, he is referred to as Galvin the Bastard, not Galvin McGowan, which is actually good marketing for the McGowans, because there are some people to this day who incorrectly think his last name was the Bastard. The decline of the public school system, kids. It happens everywhere, unfortunately. But he had an illegitimate son named Drave. And at that time, he had taken his mother's last name, and she was a prostitute. Let's to get their terms right, straight, kids. She was a lady of the night, and she especially was a high-end lady of the night. She serviced triarchs. And she exclusively serviced Galvin because of his, well, proclivities in the bedroom that I won't get into. Let's just say, are you familiar with the Marquis de Sade? Yeah. For an X amount of money, she was willing to put up with that. However, she had a son that she named Drave. And she asserted, a few years later, in 629, in 628, brought him as a young man to the duarchy and said, "Hey, this is the illegitimate son of Galvin." And they're like, "There's really no way to prove that. That is there. Like, you've been with so many men." And remember, there was no DNA test this time. However, he did have a very striking appearance to the late king. So, in the best interest of stability of the triarchy, and after asking around, basically, doing some investigation, they determined there was a good 90% likelihood this kid was actually the illegitimate prince of Eusoleces. And they declared him in 629 to be the heir of the triarchy, which is the first time the term was ever used publicly. Before that, it just used the term heirs, or prince of Eusoleces, or official titles such as that. The new triarchy took over with the two princes of the... Sorry. Always end up kicking that damn camera out of place. See if that corrects. No idea what that alarm is about. Get out of here. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? Alright, I think I'm back in position now. The new triarchy was Drave McGowan, allegedly the son of Galvin the Bastard. They did in future times unlock the McGowan catacombs in Mount Zirid, and they drilled into one of Drave's teeth, and they performed a DNA test. Now, even though the DNA was very old and corrupted, with their advanced technology at that time, they were able to determine with a 90% probability he was, in fact, an heir to Galvin the Bastard. So the McGowan lawn is still intact. It has not been corrupted by, a false error. Although the future kings will be accused of that. The new triarchy was under Dre McGowan, Frack Kulik, and another tongue twister here. Pronounce this as two different things. Dur-El, sort of like Jur-El or Kal-El. Kolk were the third historical triarchy. Now, Drave was very, very good at his job because he had the ultimate negative example, which was his late father. First thing he did was he pardoned his father's killer, who openly confessed. All the other assassins ran off into the marketplace and disappeared. He was the only one who stayed for the civil enforcers, like hands up, knife on the ground, and said, "I did this." And yes, it was the brother of the man who was tortured to death. I'll come up with a name for him eventually, I swear. Spent many decades in jail. And jail this time was basically a wooden cage that's lightly covered with a roof. The first early jails of Ulysses, they used a cargo container in the early days, but that eventually got turned into useful tools because it's steel, so they got rid of that. Now it's more like a fenced-in like hut that you can't leave. Think like in Vietnam where they keep the POWs, like a big wooden cage. Basically that, with like a roof over it. Very harsh conditions. It's not meant to be nice. It's a prison. He also instituted, seemingly out of nowhere, anti-domestic and child abuse laws, which beforehand most texts were like, of course I'm not going to abuse my children or my spouse. Like, that's unheard of. Why would that need to be a law? Well, it's a law now, so don't do it. He also made it clear, very clear at his coronation, that no one is above the law, not even a triarch. And he officially sees his father's assassination as an extrajudicial execution. In other words, if the triarchy were functional, they would have held him to account, and he would probably been put to death. Sorry. My notes app is fighting me. Now, that's one McGowan triarch who shit the bed. Let's talk about the Kolks. Darrell Kolk. Very, very, very matter-of-fact person. Almost like a Vulcan. Like, very just passionate person. It's about the numbers. It's about the money. But one day, whilst in his office, it came to him, like being struck by lightning. We need a surplus for a war chest just in case the Trox get uppity. What if I invent a tax? A small one that no one's going to object to, but will generate a lot of money over time. So he invented the document tax. And this is, for documentation, you need to prove your legitimacy. Identifications issued by the government. That would basically be more like a government clearance than like, a photo ID, because there were no photos this time. Basically, it's a piece of paper signed and sealed by the triarchy saying you are who you say you are, and we trust you. That's kind of a big deal. If you were a roaming merchant and you had that, you would be very popular. Because at this time, truck grifters, which has since become a racial slur for trucks as grifter, are putting on the grift, are referring to a group of trucks of merchants as a grift. As you had people selling inferior merchandise that was harmful or perhaps even dangerous. One of the worst ones was factory furniture rejects from certain factory barons. They had huge stockpiles of furniture that were made with inferior rotted wood because they bought wood en masse and didn't really care until it came to quality control at the end of the process of making chairs and furniture, tables, stools, about, will it hold weight? It's gone out again. You can see I'm like deliberately trying to puff on it. It just keeps going out. So it's a problem with thicker cigars. And again, cigars do not have gunpowder in them. And yes, Philip Morris puts accelerants in their cigarettes to keep them lit. That's why they'll keep burning even when you put them down. Cigars don't have that. They're just tobacco. Very good tobacco, I might say. So, sort of like a Ron Burgundy moment in Ron Burgundy 2. One of my favorite quotes from him is, well, what if we just make stuff up? Referring to the news. I never laughed so hard in my life about that, because I'm like, at some point, someone in the media literally said that. And I want to believe it was Ron Burgundy. But, unfortunately, it was probably a real journalist somewhere. That's basically what Colt did. In the document tax, anytime you were issued a document that you needed, like say a birth certificate or a business license, we would be charged a small tax. And most people begrudgingly, it's like, damn bureaucracy, and then they pay the tax. Well, you see, the problem is that Colt can't issue a tax by himself, because that affects everyone, just like a law. He could regulate taxation. In other words, he could make an existing tax less or worse. And yes, I do say worse, not more. And he can decide that certain things cannot be taxed anymore. So removing or repealing a tax, sunsetting it, as it were. But he can't make a tax. That requires all three triarchs to come together and vote on it. So he didn't tell anyone for a long time, decades. Until Drave found out. And Drave found out because he too wanted a birth certificate for the Prince of Ulysses that had just hatched. And yes, they lay eggs because they're mimicking the Heziah. And he's going to fill out with one of the Internal Revenue Service's magistrates, one of their judges, because he didn't want to bother Kolk with it. And of course, they had all been instructed to collect this tax too, because it needs to be seen as legitimate. It can't be something that just the king does. Also, it wouldn't generate a lot of revenue because he doesn't handle that directly. So, he's going to a random magistrate in the offices of this great hall. And they're like, yeah, that'll be a quarter debit, please, for the documentation fee. And the King Drave is like, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, the documentation fee. You guys issued it like a couple of decades ago. And Drave's like, I don't remember voting on that. So he then goes down the hall to the office of Kolk, closes the door behind him, and he's like, what's this to hear about a document tax? I never voted on that. When did we vote on that? And that's when Kolk is like, okay, you're going to be mad. You're going to be mad. But I kinda invented it. And Drave, being level-headed, unlike his father, was like, okay, why? And he's like, this is what you're going to like. I'm making a war chest in case the Trox invade. Now, at this moment in history, truck merchants are becoming a problem because of their shit wares, but no one has like crossed the western woods with like an army of them. That, and nor would they if you ask the average truck, "Hey, you want to invade Ulysses?" They'd be like, "No." So the techs would probably murder the fuck out of us. Like, no, they're all armed first of all, and they're all kind of racist. They don't like us very much. They barely tolerate like buying our shit. It would be seen as absurdity, like a joke. It's like, no, we're not going to invade Ulysses. It's like, not only are they all armed, they all hate us. So Drave went to Kulik and told the other Triarch what happened. And Kulik is like, you have to prosecute this dude. Like, you cannot be like your father. And you cannot let him be like your father and just run roughshod with his purview. Like, first of all, that's not his purview. He invented the tax. He's not allowed to do that. He's only allowed to sunset them. Secondly, you said your coronation, even a Triarch must be held accountable. So, it's go time. Do your job. So, went back to Kolk's office with a couple of warders and arrested a king in his own office. Put him in shackles. And of course, Kolk is like, "Why are you doing this to me, bro? Like, we're friends. Like, what?" Always play the pity card and the friendship card. And Drave is like, "I'm sorry. I have to, as the highest judge of this land, I have to prosecute you. You have been defrauding the people of this nation for years. And if not for the fact that you let your magistrates set it on autopilot as though it was a thing that's legitimate, I wouldn't have found out." So, Gerald Kolk had a very long public trial. And there were a lot of people who were of the opinion that he was a good ruler that made one mistake. Like, let it slide. It's like, he now knows not to do this. Like, no one got injured by this other than loss of finances. But it wasn't even that much individually. Basically, they were using the disassociated harm idea. Is that it's sort of like when the bank robbers say, "Don't worry about the bank losing all this money. They have insurance." And then each insurance policy holder will have to pay like a penny more in policy rate hikes because of this. Like, no. Just because you hurt everyone a little bit doesn't mean you didn't hurt people. So, after all the evidence, after all the lawyers bickering back and forth, after so many witnesses coming in, going back almost 20 years, they even found the first person that he did this to. And they were of the opinion, like, I thought it was legit, sounded legit, I paid it. And they basically let him slide. Now, he was instantly retired to Kingfather. He did not have purview anymore, so there was a little bit of a duarchy going on there. And then his son, eventually, after a few years, just growing up, was coronated, and they had a triarchy again. But he never went to jail, and he never publicly apologized. And basically, he got a freebie. It's like, most people are of the opinion the punishment fit the crime, but Drave was like, he should go to jail for at least some period of time. Like, come on. Like, he defrauded thousands of people. And the real stinger of it is that the war chest he was creating was only about half the money. No one knows what he did with the other half. He never kept records of it. So somewhere there's a stash of quarter debits, or quarter, not quarter debits, but quarter sovereigns, silver coins, small silver coins, what size of, U.S. quarter, that are hidden somewhere or were squirreled away somewhere because they never were held, they never were accounted for in anyone's coffers. They're just gone. The equivalent of like basically $10 million in silver, just gone. But hey, the Triarchy now has a nice fat war chest. Yay. Anyway, and coming up here is something that one of my long-term test readers, I would say, pointed out, in that in the year 840, between the end of this Triarchy and the beginning of Voss's reign, the infamous Voss McGowan, almost as bad as Galvin, but not quite. There is a span of time there, the length of a Panjian lifetime, that's not accounted for. And so there's a missing Triarchy. So officially, right now, on this live stream, I am retconning an official retcon. The year 840, to address this continuity issue, and they would be the fourth Triarchy, Valorous McGowan, Micah Kulik, and Krim Kolk use this war chest to send an expedition of newly created Army Rangers, a light and fast cavalry, highly trained, highly proficient, standing military force, to return to the humble crash site, because no one had been there in centuries. And they were afraid that the wilderness would eat it up and damage it beyond repair. So, they set out, and they found it, and it was kind of hard to find. At first, they thought it was a weird precipice in the middle of a forest because it had been completely overgrown with vines. So, these rangers spent a few days clearing the vines with axes by hand and digging up the dirt around it to sort of cull the vines from growing back, which they would each year, unfortunately. And that set a precedent where they would return every couple of years to cut down these vines, so the vines would overtake the ship and crush it. But they found something inside the Humble. They brought back a few books that they found in a hidden compartment that could only be accessed by one of the command keys, sort of like a storage locker. And I guess in all the hustle and bustle of establishing the new colony and creating new little ships, no one ever thought to go back and get these books. But these are essentially the instruction manual on how to repair and maintenance the Humble. It's literally an instruction manual. The problem is that it directly states that what you need to fuel this vessel is something that you don't know what the hell it is. And have no means of making it. Again, think like the anime Dr. Stone. They're just now in the Iron Age. Like, they have no clue what this material is that it runs off of and how to find it or how to get it. But hey, it's an interesting read. The books were made out of a synthetic material similar to plastic. A polymer that does not degrade or age. Otherwise, it would have long since eroded away. And so there was a little bit of a celebration. It's like we brought back these let's call it what it is, sacred books from the Humble. And we know what's wrong with it. It just needs fuel. But we have no idea how to make said fuel. Or even what that fuel is. because it does not give a description of what it is other than the name of it. And that scientific term has long since become defunct. No one knows what it means. However, around that same time, the scientists at the public school, who were partially funded by the government, the Triarchy, discovered two new things. Very, very useful things. One, they discovered titanium dioxide. Now, artists know this very well. It is the color of brilliant white. It is what makes copy paper super white. It is also kind of toxic, but that's neither here nor there. If you heat it up hot enough, it turns into its requisite metal, which is titanium. But the techs didn't know that. What they would do is they would add it into the folding process of steel because they believed it would make the steel no longer black. They wanted shiny metal like the Humble's made out of. And in that mistake, they essentially forged layered titanium steel alloy in what would be a Damascus-style sword. They created a steel that would essentially break other swords of that time. Iron swords, steel swords, didn't matter. They created what would since be known as tech steel. It is a alloy of titanium steel with just a little bit of cobalt. High carbon. It is flexible. Has a slight bluish hue with a slight rainbow effect, similar to polished titanium. It is incredibly strong. It's much stronger than any steel or iron being smelted at that time. That's a war winner right there. Imagine if you had even just a bunch of pikemen with unbreakable, undullable titanium steel blades in a time when people were just barely had iron tools. You could conquer the world. But the next invention they came up with, ironically, trying to find ways of making superior fertilizer for the fields, was gunpowder. They found out that the potassium nitrate that you find in eat poop basically, could be extracted and mixed with charcoal and sulfur of a certain amount, would burn, and it would explode if contained. The Triarchy was demonstrated this with some of the first rockets as sort of basically a fireworks show. The Triarchy immediately said, never show this in public again, and start making explosive ordnance with it, because they recognized its true potential. One, for mining, it's going to be able to blast away rocks and things that a normal iron pick wouldn't be able to clear. Secondly, if loaded into iron bombs and then, say, hurled with a trebuchet or a catapult, well, you just maxed out your artillery game for that particular technology level, didn't you? You now have explosive shells in an age when people are chucking arrows at each other. The techs are gearing up for war, but they don't know why or who against. Other than they're surrounded by Baylors who can't be trusted. They barely trust the Trox. The Trox are like, as long as you pay me, I don't care what you think about me. But they know there are other Baylors. They know that there are other Baylors just beyond that horizon, plotting, scheming, doing Baylor things. And the techs really, really don't like that. McGowan the Great's last words in his journal/book were to expand, explore, innovate, and avenge the crash of the humble. And that's exactly what they're going to do. But first, they need to know the nature of their enemies. One, do they even exist? Are they just paranoid? With the Trox being laissez-faire capitalists, as long as you do business with them, you can somewhat control them through soft power. However, the Trox can do the same thing if you become dependent on their goods. Another thing that they found in the Humble, in the same compartment, was a book on spells and incantations, written by an ancient magician, and, of course, immediately denounced as just buffoonery. These spells and incantations, much like in the Harry Potter universe, if you're a muggle, you have no magical ability. Same as in my universe. If you do not have a piece of Azah, a greater piece than everyone else, you don't have any magic. But you are capped by the amount of magic that you are bestowed upon at birth. So, you can do two things to get around that. You can invocate a higher power, a patron deity, or even a more powerful sorcerer. Or you can enchant, which is sort of like a charged shot. Remember the Halo pistol where you hold down the trigger and then it just wrecks the hell out of elite shields with one shot? Sort of like that, but it's more creepy and over candles and chanting a mantra again and again and again. Like light as a feather, stiff as a board. Which I've done that. It does, it works. I don't know if it's just a perception thing, but I've lifted incredibly heavy things with just 3 people doing light as a feather, stiff as a board. There's something about it that I can't put my finger on, but it's definitely somewhat metaphysical. But in my universe, you have to have magic. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time and your breath. And so, for people who would read this book, they would try the spells and incantations, and of course they did dick all. So they just assume this is just old school, old world buffoonery. But if, over time, they would eventually find out, oddly enough, through the antithesis of magic, through science, that psychics are real. And some of them are pretty damn powerful. And some of them still, through genetic enhancement, could be made more powerful. But that's for a future time. Alright, so that's the end of the retcon triarchy, the 4th triarchy. It's fun. I wanted them to return to the Humble at some point and establish that tradition, as you see in Revenge of the Forsaken, because over time, the forest will eat anything. Especially a starship, because it's stationary. Pardon me. The 3 prongs of the drive section are a great thing for vines to grow on. No matter how slick the outside and metallic the outside, the vines are going to take it over, sort of like kudzu. And so they go back every couple of years and salt the dirt, as you see in Revenge of the Forsaken and the volume Truth, and cut the vines down. Now, some people, even in that time, in the Revenge of the Forsaken's time, not this time, don't believe that the king takes an entourage out to the crash site of the Humble to essentially do gardening. To cut down vines and clear stuff off of this ancient starship. Oh, but they do. However, the 5th triarchy in 1058, you can see now why this was a terse read if you just put it matter of fact. It's like the Bible. It's like this beget that, this happened here. It's all facts and dates. It's not anything flamboyant or remotely thematic. But it's much different when I'm sitting here telling you about it. It's story time. The 5th triarchy, Voss McGowan, Hab Kulik, and Asov Kolk. Now, here's where you start getting some real conspiracy. And the racist term for a group of texts is conspiracy. And I know that's also what a group of ravens is called as well. That's intentional because of the black feathers. A conspiracy is where a group of people conspire to do something that is not necessarily illegal, but looked down upon. The triarchy, this fifth triarchy, did several things that the people were not made aware of until they were already done. First and foremost, Voss took a detachment of rangers to the Humble to clear the vines again and to salt the ground. However, he took almost a herd's worth of pack enacs. Because the last time he was there as a boy, there was a hinge that had broken off the cargo bay door. And he believed that enough enacs, if bridged across their backs, could bring it back to Ulysses, and the smiths could figure out a way to forge it. Well, that's exactly what he did. He did not tell anyone he was doing this, except the other triarchs. They were okay with it. So, the king returned from his quest, and the people lined the streets as they normally do, heading from the east side of town into the center part of town, where the new palace had recently been constructed. And that is the palace you see in Revenge of the Forsaken, that has inner courtyard and then a inner keep, and then there's actually stables below ground, which are not mentioned, but that's where they magically produce enacs and carriages from. There's an underground parking garage, essentially, but for stables and carriages. It also has a side door going into the dungeon, where Master Giggles resides. So, you can imagine how shocked everyone was, King coming back from the quest. So yeah, he's back, and he brings through town this 50-foot long metallic, what looks like a giant door hinge, made of this gleaming blue steel they had never seen before. And so everyone got real quiet. They're like, what the hell is this? It's like, did you bring back a piece of the Humble? What for? Voss would not talk to the press about it. He immediately took it to the newly established tech armory. Use that old war chest for my daddy Durrell there. And it took them a long time, but they figured out how to take chunks off of it and hammer them into little tiny plates. And those little tiny plates were then riveted onto a leather suit, essentially, to make scale mail. And that is how Voss's armor, which you see Gawain II wear, Hazayan themed, with a beak, sort of like a medieval plague doctor's mask. You could see it in Revenge of the Forsaken, the truth. I draw it multiple times. It's very beautiful armor in real life. I may have to make like a cosplay of it with like plastic plates or something. 3D printed maybe. But at the time, they could only figure out how to tear off chunks and make them into like little billets, little like $50 pieces of plate. So Voss was like, screw it, send it. I'll wear a scale mail, even though it's technically obsolete by this time. Everyone's starting to make plate. And they make a scale mail armor that, just like in D&D being enchanted armor, is damn near indestructible. Arrows bounce off of it. It will absorb like any blow or piercing from a sword. It will even bend swords over the king's body, although it might cause bruising underneath from the impact. It's effectively indestructible. Now, Voss's original visor had 2 slits for eyes, and it was also made of just regular tech steel. Gawain II, wanting to be cooler and different than his dad, made a new helm plate that was raisable and had 2 glass, think like Coke bottle thick, like bottom of a Coke bottle thick lenses of glass. And it was a glass and resin laminate. So it was like safety glass. If it broke, it would just bead off. It would not like shatter and go into his eyes. He could also remove them and replace them. He would carry multiples with him in his arming chest that held the armor when he wasn't wearing it. He also had 2 gauntlets made. This is Galactic II again, which are made of tech steel and are observably a different material than the plates from the Humble, the scale metal from the Humble, with clawed gauntlets, and he specifically requests clawed gauntlets so he could, during melee, use as a melee weapon. Because when the Norks would get too close, he wanted to have something he could use up close with his free hand. Voss also commissioned from the hinge 2 swords made, and we talk about this in the beginning part of Truth, of Revenge of the Forsaken Truth. We're getting close to Revenge of the Forsaken Tom. Revenge of the Forsaken will basically happen towards the end of this live stream. And then we're going to get fun with it in the next one. The Humble's hinge produced not only a suit of armor, later in Galactic II's time, it would produce plate mail for the Triarchs, Kulix and Kolk's armor, out of plate mail, because they were able to then figure out how to forge it correctly. What they found out is that humbonium, is what they called it at the time, because they didn't know what the hell it was made out of, is graphene reinforced titanium steel alloy. So it has microscopic layers of graphene in it to make it super strong in one direction, sort of like a grain in a piece of wood. If you go against the grain, it will snap in half. The only strength and rigidity it has is titanium steel, which isn't as strong as the graphene reinforced sod. So it has a directionality and a grain to it, which is not immediately observable to the naked eye. It took them years to figure this out. Many, many pieces of the Humble's hinge were just worked to death. And as any blacksmith will tell you, you could overwork a piece of steel and it will just become useless. You have to like re-drop forge it and all sorts of crap to get it to be viable again. The 2 swords made are seen both in Revenge of the Forsaken and are named. They are named weapons, so they do more damage. Making fun of that trope, sorry. A Montenegro style great sword. So a big, huge sword. Think like a 5-foot long sword. Double, maybe even triple-handed, with a big crossguard that ended in a small battle axe sharpened on each side. Voss called it blue because it's originally, before the war with the Norks that his son would engage in, it had a bluish, almost sapphire sparkle to it, just like any other forged humbonium at the time. And his coat of plates looked like that, until again his son, wanting to be different, found a way to stain them black, or a sort of blackish gray. Again, we'll get over that. I'll go over that later on. And by that time, Voss was dead, so it wasn't like, Voss walked in and Galactic II was like staining the suit black. It's like, kid, what are you doing? It's like, no. It was already inherited in his by the time he decided to change it. And mainly he changed it for warfare, for personal taste. It wasn't like, oh, I just want to be different than my dad. Now we get into the expansion era. The expansion era is probably one of the best things this triarchy did, the 5th triarchy, formerly the 4th, because of retcon. They wanted to explore this continent that seems to stretch on forever. So they sent rangers past the Humble to see what's out there. They came back a few weeks later, and they said there's a great mountain range that ends in a fjord in a turbulent ocean to the far, far east. Many days' ride. So basically, hundreds of miles that way, there is a rocky coastline that goes into mountains. And they theorize those mountains meet up with Mount Zirid at some point. That is incorrect. There is actually a valley between them, but it's Arctic, so you can't really cross it. It's a tundra. They also found it out by sending rangers that way too. The Ranger Corps essentially became de facto explorers. What they found is that there were settlements surrounding Ulysses of basically descendants of people who had skipped town before going to trial. They were outlaws. But because they were multi-generational, the text left them alone. And a lot of these guys were farmers. They would farm stuff and then sell a percentage back to Ulysses in town as merchants. It's just they didn't come in themselves. They would send their children out to do that, which is why later on in Bailorment, that's how they got around expulsion, is that they would have kids as quickly as possible, and then because they didn't wear the marks of expulsion, an X on the forehead, the hands, they could go into town freely and then work and bring back money. These first outlaw farmers is what started that. That was where they got the idea from. So basically, I'm not allowed in town anymore because I committed a crime and then outlawed myself. But we live so far away, hopefully they'll never find us. Well, the Army Rangers found them. And of course, they're not going to lie and say, yeah, I committed a crime and skipped town a long time ago. They're like, okay, what was your crime? And it's like, yeah, I stole some stuff and pawned it. They're like, it's been how long ago? Like 100 years ago? They're like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But they would mark where these farms were. And sometimes they were way out in the middle of nowhere, completely self-sufficient. They had made a life for themselves out there. But what the Tech Army Rangers said is that you're now under the, basically under the laws of the Tech Nation. We've basically moved the border. You're inside Ulysses again. You're just in the territory of Ulysses, not the city limits. And they're like, oh, okay. So does that mean I'm free to go in with no consequence? They're like, just don't tell anyone what you did. What they found to the very south was a shoreline that was capable to making a wharf and maybe a merchant marine headquarters. So Voss was like, okay, again, dipping into that ill-gotten war chest, let's make a merchant marine to explore further, to go into this turbulent ocean that seems to be surrounding the lower southeast side of this territory, this continent. So then they sent runners out into the Commonwealth. Well, that's a problem because they're Army Rangers. They are technically a foreign military invading the Commonwealth. And most of these guys would get forcibly expelled by the militias that they did not know existed. See, the Trox knew that the Techs had a war chest. They knew it. Like, they're not dumb. And they also know that they're not trusted because they're Bailors. Even though, from their point of view, we've done nothing wrong. But our neighbors think we did something really bad, and we should pay for that at some point. So, they had been forming a decentralized network of militias under the control of the barons. Remember the barons? They're oligarchs who are business leaders who have an ethics charter. They would fund the militia, but the militia had its own charter and its own mission, which is basically national defense. They don't answer directly to the barons. They are sort of an independent military force, but they are funded by the barons. So if they go rogue, the barons can cut off your war chest, and then whatever you have with you is what you're going to be fighting with. And then they'll dispatch a posse to come bring you into justice, basically. Essentially, we use the militia to get rid of the militia, should they go rogue. And that is a system that the Commonwealth pretty much uses to this day. They do have a standing military, but that's only because the Techs basically insist upon it, just for rank structure. There are a lot of townships in the Commonwealth today that just have a Minuteman-style militia. and they are assigned a duty number. Basically, you're a militia, I don't know, 28. And this is your territory that you are expected to protect and patrol. And if something goes down in your territory, you are directly responsible for being your first responder and dealing with that. And if you cannot deal with that, it is your responsibility to inform the other militias around you to come coalesce there and stomp out the problem. Basically, if you can't solve the problem initially, go get help. These Army Rangers, lone groups of, say, 4 Rangers, they would get surrounded by militia, threatened, asked, interrogated, and basically just smacked on the ass and sent back home. And they reported that to the Triarchy. They're like, you're not getting past the Commonwealth. Like, you might could circumvent to the south, but going into the Commonwealth past the Western Woods, it's no go, man. Like, they have militias sometimes of 100 armed men that just descend on you from fucking nowhere, coming out of the damn sticks and the tall grass, basically. Think like redneck Viet Cong. That's basically what they're like. They are very, very good at their job, but they are independent and independently funded. So it's kind of impossible to figure out where they are and what they're doing at any particular moment. But that's the worst type of enemy. The enemy, you don't know where they are or what they're doing at any particular moment. The fear of the unknown. Now, at this same time, the Merchant Marine took a few years to set up. They started making large boats, sailboats, to explore this ocean that is beneath them to the southeast. I wish I had made a map. I will make a map eventually, I promise, in the next one. Because you're going to need it to understand the progress of the war with the Dorks. But they found that there is a land bridge connecting the southern part of the Commonwealth and the very southwestern tip of what the Tex believed to be their territory, although that became in dispute later. And this thin land bridge is a little mountain range that would be a good tactical location for, say, artillery, if you wanted to command the area. And it goes down into this southern continent, which they believed at that time was another large continent, but it actually was sort of an island peninsula. Think like if Australia had a land bridge to, like, through the Philippines to Asia, and like it was just a continuous little strip of land. Something like that, basically. It's a large, like, island continent connected by a teeny tiny little land bridge. And on the other side is ocean as well. The texts are like, interesting, and they took note of it. And so they decided to form an expedition exploring that land bridge with King Voss himself, and they also brought King Kulik, because Kulik wanted to be the cartographer and map stuff himself. Really, he just wanted to get out of the palace. But having 2 Triarchs in one location is problematic. It also necessitates a large entourage, which is basically how they were able to justify having so many Rangers surrounding them. It's like, it's not that we're invading, we're just exploring, but we have the kings with us, so we got to have a lot of armed dudes with us. Like, say, 1,000 at least. Really, they wanted to be able to overpower any Troc militia they ran into, just in case. They also could use that excuse to them, is that, well, this is the king just exploring. Like, we're not invading you, so piss off, basically. Now, the further south you go, the closer to the equator you get on Hazaya, the hotter it gets, just like on Earth. The king got his detachment to a land bridge, and they bivouacked on top of a little plateau at the end of a mountain chain that is heading towards this big continent, this big new continent to the south they found. They didn't have any trouble with Troc militias. There were a few farmer looky-loos. It was like, hey, you guys are new. But they never really stopped and said hi. because they didn't want to alert the militias. And of course, by the time the militia shows up, all of these techs are gone, so they're like, okay, well, whatever. We'll get them when they come back. Now, they get to the land bridge, and there are primitive nomadic people. They're Panjian. They're not Hezaian. Living there, and they try to make contact with them, but every time they get close to them, of course, they would scurry away because they're fucking terrified of these guys wearing plate armor and riding on backs of Enacs, and also wearing all black. They kind of look ominous as shit. So they were a little disappointed about that, but they figure, we'll give it time. We'll make contact with them eventually. So they keep going further south, and they encounter a big like prairie land, and it's very grassy, and there are these large canaries. Think like a turkey-sized canary. They got short beaks, blue eyes, yellow feathers, bright yellow feathers, which in the summertime blends in with the grass, which turns a golden color as well. So they blend in. And they honk like a goose. These are Octan Hezaians. They are yellow birds, is what the locals call them. They are not sentient. They are actually quite dumb. They make good pets. You can pet them. Some people keep them as pets. But for the most part, just like Eeps and Enacs, they are considered livestock. They're eaten and hunted. And Voss and his guys were trying to talk to these Hezaians because their Hezaians talk. Why don't these little yellow ones talk? They thought that was very confusing. And a group of Nork hunters came by and saw them like trying to talk to the yellow birds, and started laughing at them. And then finally, like, okay, well, we got a group of people here who will approach us. And they said hello in Panjian, and they said back something in ancient. And they're like, oh shit. These guys don't speak Panjian. They speak a mixture of Panjian and Noversani, the Ancient One's language. Because they're direct descendants of the Norqua, the Baylors. So, they found some guys who, through just sheer nerd intensity, just know Ancient, because it was a hand-me-down language. The School of Ulysses does teach it, but it's very, very basic. And because of also a lot of techs just don't want to speak it. That is the language of our invaders. We don't speak that. Just out of pride, they don't speak it. But they're forced to because these guys speak a mixture of that and Panjian. So much less Panjian that they're unintelligible otherwise. They managed to finally get a conversation going with these guys, and they say that, we're long hunters, and we work for this particular lord. We're out hunting yellowbirds. But who are you guys? And it said, well, we are two kings of the Tech Nation. It's Kulik and myself, Voss McGowan. We're the direct descendants of the great ones who brought you here on the Humble. And they just look at him like, I was born here. Like, no one brought us here. Is the Humble a ship? Like, what is the Humble? And they had to explain the concept of a starship to them. And they're like, I think you've been in the suns too long, guy. It's like, maybe you should take off all that metal armor. I think you're cooking yourselves. So, even though the guy was being facetious, they just start taking off their armor, except for a chest plate and helmet, just in case. Because it is sweltering hot. It's the middle of the Octan summer. They really badly timed this expedition, because the Octan summer to Techs, who are Arctic birds technically, they are, later the disparaging slur would be called penguins. Ulysses is a cold, wet place. It's like England. It rains a lot. It's temperate to cold. It snows heavily, and it's in the winter time. It's not a tropical place at all. Whereas Octan ranges from grasslands like savanna to jungle. It's very, very wet, humid, and hot. A lot. or at the savannah, it's a dry heat, but it's still intolerably hot, especially during the summer. And remember, Hawaiian summers last a year or more because the Hawaiian year is 3.2 Panjian years. The planet rotates slower than their homeworld. So they're brought into town, into Octon. They see a big city. It's almost as big as Ulysses. In the center of it is this huge gold gilded 3-tower castle. It looks like something, fantastic. It's nowhere near as dull looking as Ulysses because the techs like their gray boxes. They also like cobblestone. They're very austere people. If it functions, it's good enough. And they start noticing something. Half the people there are wearing these yellow sashes, similar to the sashes that you see with this wraparound robe that I'm wearing. Imagine like sort of a pirate-style sash, but a little better kempt around the waist. And they notice that the people who are doing stuff, like working, are gathering stuff, or even the guys that they're trailing, these long hunters, all have this yellow sash. So King Kulik rides up to long hunters because he speaks better English than speaks the language better than Voss. And he's like, hey, everyone wearing a yellow sash, is that significant of something? And then they're like, yeah, it means we're owned. It's like, what do you mean, owned? It's like, we're slaves. We're Norqua. We're owned by someone. And then they show the crest that's embroidered in their yellow sash, and it shows a crest similar to a tech house crest, and that signifies who owns them. And that's when they're like, oh shit. So he trails back to Voss, tells Voss, the guys we're following are slaves. And everyone wearing a yellow sash you see, like half the people we come across, they're slaves too. And Voss is like, for fuck's sake. Half the people in the city are wearing. He's like, yep. So what do you want to do about this? And Voss is like, we haven't even met their leaders yet. Like, let's keep our chill. Like, they obviously don't know about the humble. They don't know about the bailers or the bailing out of their ancestors. They don't know any of this shit. We'll just come off like crazy people if we start accusing them of shit. So they're shown to the Octon throne room. And the king comes out. He's wearing gilded robes embroidered with gold thread. Very nice, very fancy. Beads. Think like the gaudiest king you can imagine. That's what this guy looks like. The classic 3-point crown, jewel in each point. It looks like a traditional king. Whereas the Triarchs, except for a platinum crown, simple band, and black robes and a crest, they look like, any other tech, basically. Because, again, the techs are very austere people. They don't flaunt their wealth like that. The crown is a symbol of authority, not a symbol of wealth. So, King of Octon comes in all of his golden glory. The entire throne room is gilded in gold. And in the walls is inlaid in ancient, which no one can read, but it's the story of how the first King of Octon came to be. And his throne is 6 feet off the ground. Like, there's a chair that just, imagine like the legs of the chair just extend up uncomfortably tall. And they were all thinking before the king comes in to themselves privately, how the hell does he get in that chair? Is he super tall? Does he have like freakishly long legs? Because the Norks are noticeably taller than Tex, but not that tall. So, king comes in, he claps his hands, and every servant and slave near the throne forms basically a, I hate to use the term, but human staircase. They're not human though, they're Panjians. And the king just steps on their backs like a meat ladder to ascend his throne. And that is deeply symbolic of the type of person you're dealing with. This is a person who literally steps on the backs of his lessers to ascend his throne. This is elitism at its highest. The techs are offended by this site. At first, they were like, okay, that's a wonky ass chair that guy sits in. And then when they see how he gets into it, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, you're an elitist prick. Great. That's not to say that triarchs don't have sort of an ostentatious air about them, but that's from authority. They were chosen to lead. This guy just fell out of the right, birth canal. Let's be honest. It's a traditional monarchy. This guy is descendant of Savin Krent, the very troublesome Agro and later Norqua, who basically kept causing crap on the Humble, and then instigated the bailout of the Humble, which caused it to crash. This is a kingdom built by sycophants and narcissists. And even though, yes, Galvin was a psycho, and Voss, unfortunately, lost his shit over this encounter, because if you read Revenge of the Forsaken, you know it's coming up with Voss, unfortunately. This is the diametric opposition between the Norks and the Techs. Fundamental worldview separation. They keep slaves. They have a traditional monarchy that has no ins or outs of the people's will. They rule by force. They rule through enslavement. They rule by tyranny, essentially. The Techs, although they have a weird triarchy, they chose the triarchy because they tried a republic and it failed. So this is what they got to work with. And the triarchs, for the most part, remain humble because they realize that they rule by the consent of the governed. And that, just like Galvin, you could be voted out by knife point. So, yeah. That's gone out. It's past the ring anyway. You're not supposed to smoke it past the ring. So, they start talking to each other, the king and the two triarchs. Kulik sort of acts as a translator. And the king basically is like, who the hell are you people? Why are you here? And they explain that we're explorers from the Tech Nation, that we are the two kings of the triarchy. High, basically. And they gently remind the king that your ancestor agreed to live under Tech law when he boarded the Humble. And again, he's like, what the hell is a Humble? They explain the concept of a starship to him. They're like, you people are crazy. We ascended from the gods' laps on clouds. It's like, we are divine. It's like, we have no idea who you people are or where you came from. But you could go back where you came from. And they try to explain everything leading up to the Humble, the Norqua, where that term comes from. And the king is like, I don't know what you're talking about, but if it sounds very much like your ancestors hid in the ground while my ancestors were being enslaved slowly. So you kind of sound like cowards. Now, he wasn't being malicious. He was just objectively criticizing the story that he believes is a cool story, bro. It's not like actually what happened historically. From his point of view, the Techs are crazy. They obviously have heat stroke or something. And they just seem to be increasingly offended by everything they see and interact with. Well, one of the king's entourage, a very later famous historical character, Vic Cubic, or Bit Cubic, I believe it is, with B, like in Buzz. He was one of the king's favorite warders. He was honor guard, formerly a ranger. He took offense to the King of Octon saying you sound like a bunch of cowards. So he drew his sword out of anger. He was about ready to fucking stab the king. Instantly, all of the Nork King's warders, armed with bronze weapons, not iron, threw spears at him from every direction. Then they all bounced off his steel carapace and blunted thankfully. Otherwise, there would be no Cubic the Blasphemer to brighten our day. And if you don't know who that character is, read Revenge of the Forsaken, because if you visit ancient Bailorment, oh boy, he's going to come say hi, and you're not going to like it. But there was a time when Cubic was loyal to the Triarchy, when he was in the entourage. He was the guy. He was the king's right-hand man. And albeit he acted undisciplined at that moment, Kulik diffused the situation. It's like, sorry, that was my fault. It was a mistranslation. I made it seem like you insulted our people. To which King Krent, direct descendant of Seven Krent, was like, I kind of did, but whatever. I'm willing to overlook this. Just get the hell out of my courtroom. Don't come back. And so they left in peace. They came in peace. And that's what the tech idiom, we came in peace, we shall leave in peace. So, Voss is like grinding his teeth at this point. It's like, these people are just wrong. Everything about what they believe is wrong. Everything they do is wrong. We got to do something about this. And Kulik's like, what do you want to do? Invade? And he's like, yeah. We got the war chest. We just need the people. It's like, dude, do a head count. They outnumber us at least 3-1. And that's not even if they don't throw their slaves in the mix as partisans. So Voss just kept mulling over this. They tried contacting the land bridge people again, but they ran away as usual. They put a lookout on a little fortress on top of the mountain that overlooks the land bridge, sort of an early warning system. And they left a detachment of rangers there. And they called it Europ, and U means new in Technos, and Rop means a Rop is basically a hole in the ground, or like a trench, because it was an earthen fort. It was basically Romanesque style, just dug out and then battlements put around it. It's basically a lookout post at this point. It's not like a fully fortified military outpost like it would be later in the Nork War. And they're going back through the little channel they went through Southern Commonwealth to. And Voss is like, you know what? Screw this. We're going straight to Tetric, because I want to see what those bastards are like. And like, the Kulik's like, we know what they're like. They're mostly merchants. He's like, we've never seen their city. We only know they're merchants. Their merchants are nice because they want to sell us crap. I want to know if they keep slaves. I want to know if they're in violation of the agreement that their ancestors made. So Kulik begrudgingly agrees, and they ride straight north into Tetric. Funny enough, no interference that time. They go straight into the southern entrance of town. They have a detachment of about 500 rangers with them, plus honor guard. So grand total probably about 700 people, plus the kings. Ride through town, and people recognize them. They're like, hey, the techs are here. Everyone started cheering. He's like, yay, you can pay us a visit. That's great. Immediately, people started coming up and trying to sell this entourage things, like street vendors trying to sell them crap. But they were like grabbing on them and touching them, and they're like, no, stay back. Like, so they get to the center of town. The mayor of Tetric at the time came out of the Hall of Fellowship, which is basically like their great hall. It's where the barons meet and discuss things. But halls of fellowship are kind of like combined town hall and church. Trox have this weird belief system. It's sort of a non-theistic religion of fellowship. Basically, it's like we're all in this together, so we should be nice to each other. Sort of like a watered-down version of Christianity, kind of, but with no real Christ. It's sort of a non-theistic religion, sort of, kind of. But as spoilers, as Fierce Veto points out to Cora, that does not always extend to Tex, so it's kind of racist. It just depends on the individual practitioner as to whether or not that extends to Tex or not. because historically techs have been very standoffish and very accusational. So that's not, it's natural to be like, you know what, you treat us like crap, we're going to treat you like crap, tit for tat. So it's sort of that mentality. It isn't like a foaming hatred or anything. It's more like a mutually learned disrespect. Hold on. I just cleared a lot of my to-do list. Sorry, I don't have a script. I just have an outline. All right. So uh, the techs are very uneasy with this large crowd like surrounding them. The trucks don't mean any harm by it. It's just an unexpected visit from their neighbors. Like, this is uncalled for. It's like, we should celebrate. And the techs just coming from Octon are tired and strung out and kind of pissed off from what they saw there. Not that that's the truck's fault, but it's like, more Baylors, you know? So they're brought into the Hall of Fellowship, and they see great kegs of beer, and they see a pot of multiple pots of stew, infamous traveler stew. It's sort of like a forever pot of stew. People will just throw in anything to replenish it. But at the end of the hall, there is a stained glass window in like a little alcove. And they see something they really, really, really did not want to see. They see an ancient one, a statue, carved out of wood, holding a parchment and a gear. The parchment represents diplomacy and the gear represents technology. Truck Fellowship uses this image for hospitality and friendship. They do not worship the Ancient Ones, which is immediately what Voss accused them of. You worship the Ancient Ones. Are you fucking serious, guy? It's like, the people who displaced us from our home world, the people we had to literally embezzle taxpayer funds to get rid of, you fucking worship them. And the mayor's like, no, you're misunderstanding. It's just, it's a visual metaphor. Because the Trock version of events is the Disney version. The Ancient Ones showed up, started giving us advanced technology. We mended the ties between, they mended the ties between the Agros and the Techs, which is technically true from a certain point of view. And they built ships, and now we're all here. In other words, this was a voluntary thing the whole time. They gave us intergalactic technology to colonize another world. And the people who stayed behind willingly, not because, we had to abandon them because circumstances. The mayor is trying desperately to explain this to the kings. The kings are storming out silently, doing the tech thing. And here's the point of contention. One version of historical events is Kulik rides off immediately with his half of the entourage. Voss stays behind to hear what the mayor has to say. He does not like what the mayor has to say. He says that you're liars, and he orders all of the people that have been surrounding him and his entourage to be forced into the Hall of Fellowship, and the Fellowship Hall to be set on fire. Voss has officially lost his shit. You also have to remember how sequestered Triarchs are at this time. It's like they barely interact with regular techs, especially after the assassination of Galvin. So to go from, sequestered inside of like the inner sanctum of techs, who all ideologically believe the same thing and live the same way and even dress the same way now, to then go into the inner sanctum of the Trox and see an idol of the people who are the reason we're all here forcibly, needless to say, he was not a happy camper. Now, murdering a bunch of innocent Trox and burning down their Hall of Fellowship, completely inappropriate. That is not how you respond to that situation. He should have just fucking left. But he didn't. Now, one witness who was there is Bond Veto, who is Fearsome Veto's father, and he's later will become a candy baron. He basically invented a way to refine large amounts of sugar and sell it to people. He had then expanded into confectionaries or candies, and later, much later, other types of treats, shall we say. None of which are healthy and none of which should be consumed in any large quantity. They have not yet discovered the link between sugar and diabetes, which affects Panjians as well. But he was a little boy in the crowd, and he was one of the people who rushed up and tried to sell the king lollipops that his mother had made in her little caravan, because it started out of back of a, like many businesses, grew out of the back of a traveling merchant caravan. He claims that he sold cubic 5 lollipops, and even remembers the flavors that he sold them as they came into town. So this lends a lot of validity to the old man's memory, because we are dealing with an old, this time in Revenge of the Second, an old man's memory of what happened. He said that Voss disrespectfully pushed away the mayor of Tetrick. In other words, basically like, just back off, get out of my face, as he was trying to explain further that this is not an idol, this is a metaphor. And that caused someone in the crowd to throw a rock at the king, who's, even though he's in full scale mail, heard that tink against his armor and thought they were shooting at him, which caused him to run for his enac, which then caused all of his entourage to basically turtle up, testudo, around him, and then that's what started the massacre. And it basically just went crazy from there. But by that time, Bonvetto admits that he had run away. He did not actually see who set the place on fire, who wrangled whom into the Great Hall. But he suspects what happened is once the Tex formed a military position around the king and started forming up and drawing swords, that people out of fear ran into the Great Hall. And then somehow, some way, it got set on fire. Maybe through the stampede. Or maybe just knocking over a candelabra. Who knows? That's one version of events. The agreed upon version of events is that Voss ordered his entourage to round them into the hall, including the mayor, and set them all on fire. And then he left. And that was the Tetrick massacre. That is the reason that Trox, for a very long time, became more standoffish and more hostile towards Tex entering their territory. The Tetrick massacre was completely uncalled for. They were angry at the Norks, but they transferred that anger onto the Trox, who had always treated them well in spite of the fact that the Tex kind of treated them like dirt. And because of that, it created a greater rift. That uprising of Trox that they were worried about could have actually happened now, because now they have a reason to invade Eusalices out of anger. Which the following year, they did that. But it was a rogue militia group celebrating Harvest Festival, which is sort of like their Halloween / solstice, fall equinox celebration. They all, of course, got drunk, and they're like, hey, let's go avenge the Tetrick massacre. It's like, if we ride quick enough and kill as many people as we can, maybe we can avenge them their death before we get captured and killed ourselves. Well, they rode into town later that night because the sun set on their way there, and they were never heard from again. They would find pieces of them places. Hands, feet, heads, torsos. From all accounts, the people who live on the western side of Eusalices pretty much just murdered the crap out of them and chopped up their bodies. They don't know why they did that, because expelling a bunch of murderous Trox who have come to invade your city is perfectly legal. You could have just left the bodies where they lay, but for some reason, it's maybe just out of the audacity or to send a message, they chopped them up too. Upwards of about 100 Trox took place in the Harvest Day retaliation. And so after that, they're like, okay, invading New Seas is not an option. And then there became the Sixth Triarchy. And probably the most infamous because it is detailed in Revenge of the Forsaken. It has the most iconic king of the Triarchy, who is an insert character. He started out life as the only son of Vos McGowan. He had many sisters, 3 of them. They were referred to as the princesses of Ulysses. And basically they were a coven of witches. And I'm not even I'm not being funny about that. They literally were practitioners of Panjian occultism, and they were all psychic to one extent or another. His oldest sister, Mayri, is infamous. You see her multiple times in Revenge of the Forsaken. She is sort of like a proto-feminist. She does not like the idea that if a man marries her, he instantly jumps all of the social classes to become a prince. So she would have very Faustian legal deals, because of course the McGowans have purview over the courts, to sign away her baby daddies, essentially, for lack of a better term, parental rights, so that she could have an heir and not have to deal with a man in her house calling himself a fucking prince. When she is a princess, he is not. Well, he is not a prince. And that is how Ducas Grint McGowan, the Duke of the Western Woods, came about. Is that his father was unknown to him until he came of age, and it was revealed to him who his real biological father was. Because those records were sealed by Mayri. And she was a very, very domineering mother. You see that in the visual metaphor where the one I'm working on right now at the Martial Academy, where he comes to try out his skills, is that she's wearing a massive sun hat and just literally overshadowing her son. Like, that's what it's like to live with her. It's like, this is like she is the main character. I keep kicking that damn camera, I swear. She is the main character. You live in her world. There is the middle sister, Ma, M-A-H, and she's very, very nice. There's not a lot of things negative to say about her, other than she's a pushover and just basically does whatever Mayri tells her. Then there is Mira. Mira is probably the most powerful witch of the group. She has legit powers, and she is a storm witch. She worships the goddess Mira, the goddess of atmospheres and oceans. And she is a very, very unstable goddess. When people in ancient times were struck by lightning, it was saying, oh, you must have done something to piss off Mira. And they're like, what? It's like, who knows? It's like, she's a mad goddess. So one day she's got a gentle breeze on your face. The next day she's blowing your damn house down with a tornado. It's like, just keep her happy. It's like, how? It's like, don't know. But she was blinded by a bolt of lightning. She claims that she was punished by her patron goddess for something that's coming up. Okay, so Vos and Kulik return from Octon and Tetrick. Kulik does not know about the Tetrick massacre because he left first. He skedaddled like Vos should have. Then came formal complaints. The barons of Tetrick issued multiple letters to the Triarchy saying, "Hey, what the fuck? Why did you murder our people? We need to sit down and discuss this." All of those letters were ignored. The Triarchy then had a very big problem. Just like with Galvin the Bastard weaponizing the justice system for his own sadistic ends, we now have a murderer who is the highest judge of the land. And you can't have that. If Vos sat before in judgment of a mass murderer, he could literally just laugh in his face and say, "Dude, you have a higher body count than I do. Shut up." Like, you have no legitimacy here. And that would stick in the eyes of the public, especially with the press backing that up. Um, so, they decided to basically bury it. And how they're going to do that is anyone who asks the question, is Voss a murderer, will be expelled. But here's how expulsion works. You have to publicly ask the question, or even just directly incite the question. I heard Voss murdered a bunch of Trox on his expedition down south when he came back. He went into Tetric, something happened, and he murdered them all, or murdered a big chunk of them. You're going to be scooped up by civil enforcers first, and then you're going to be brought to the palace, and then you're going to be brought to the dungeon. You're going to be introduced to the dungeon master, who has a dual role. The dungeon master doesn't just keep the infrastructure of the palace going. He is also the jailer, and sometimes, side hustle, the torturer. Who would have thought, you know? So, they sit you in the fun chair. The fun chair is got shackles on where the ankles and the wrist would be. And the kings come at you one by one and ask you to recant, as though you've committed some sort of blasphemy. And most people, by this point, if they have no spine or balls, are going to be like, you know what? I was absolutely wrong. I was drunk. I was drunk and out of my mind. I am so sorry. I will never speak about the triarchy again. They'll let you go. But if you do have balls and a spinal cord, like, say, Lady Eos. Now, she wasn't a lady then. She was just part of a high-ranking family. The Eoses are pawn brokers. They own a bunch of pawn shops in Ulysses. Very lucrative business, very respected business. And she put the question into the backside of a periodical. By this time, they had invented printing presses and were able to distribute newspapers. And you could pay to have an opinion piece put in the back page. And she said that she was dining with a business partner who also is a baron, who is a Troc, who also does pawnbroking, and they were discussing the possibility of exchanging basically merchandise. Like, if there's something you can't pawn in the Commonwealth because it's too popular or too numerous, you could bring it to Ulysses and we could, for a commission, pawn it there where it might sell. And then he brought up, well, I don't know about that. You know, one of my family members was killed in the Tetric massacre. And she's thinking, oh God, did like bandits come into town or something and murder people? And he leans in and it's like, no ma'am, your king murdered a bunch of Trocs the one and only time he visited us. It was completely like unprovoked. And again, reverse angle, the Trocs don't understand why the Techs are angry at them because they don't know the Humble was a forcible exodus. But now the Techs are being gaslit by the Triarchy and they don't know that the Tetric massacre occurred. So when you say a Tetric massacre at this time, they're thinking it's like a bunch of bandits or like a mass murderer or something. It's like, no, your king rode into town to make first contact with us officially, we thought, and he went to the Great Hall, got offended by what he saw there, and he murdered a bunch of people, including our mayor. And Eos was like, you've got to be joking, right? Like, there's no way. Voss is an honorable man. He is the highest judge in the land. All magistrates get their authority and power from him. He can't be a murderer. That would destroy the whole system. And this dude's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I lost a family member to this guy. Like, I'm not going to do any more business with you guys than what is absolutely necessary to keep my business afloat. So any type of, like, additional merger you're talking about, it's not going to happen. So, she posted that conversation in its entirety as an opinion piece. And she asked the public, does anyone else know about the Tetrick massacre? Well, guess what? That landed her in the backseat of a coach going to the palace and then going to the dungeon. Now, the second she was put in the fun chair is when she realized they're not joking. Like, they have brought a lady of means, not a lady in title, but a lady of means is what they would call her, a very rich woman, very respected woman, into the dungeon like a common criminal for posting something publicly that the Triarchy didn't like. Which is the first time the whole Triarchy was running interference for another Triarch. So they've gone beyond, like, I don't know if we can hold him accountable to, we're going to have to bury this like a cat burying turds. Otherwise it will destroy the whole system. So, the first king, Kulik, came up. And it's like, did you publish this? And she's like, yes. It's like, do you believe this? It's like, I believe he believes it. Wrong answer. So she gets an X tattooed on her right hand, top of the right hand. And she's like, what the hell is going on here? Next question. Next king. Same question, different king. She's like, you know what? I'm inclined to believe it considering you just forcibly tattooed my fucking hand. Like, you guys are acting like a guilty party. So yeah, now I do believe it. X tattoo on this hand. Finally, Voss comes up. And Voss is like, you have to recant this. Otherwise, it would destroy the entire justice system. And that's when she looked at his eyes and realized, holy shit, you did murder those trucks, didn't you? The last strap of the fun chair went around her head to immobilize her head so she can't do this. And an X was tattooed right here, right between the eyes, where everyone can see it. And she was expelled. She was then put in the back of a carriage. They did not run her out of town, as was the custom. They would gaslight the people and tell the people who were expelled that they are disloyal, that they have betrayed the nation. That's all it takes. The disloyalty accusation was enough. But in reality, their crime was blasphemy against the state. They dared to speak the truth. And because of that, the Triarchy lost a little bit of integrity and honor in the people's eyes. And if that happens too much, well, we all know what happened to Galvin. So, they did the very stupid thing of creating a subclass of people who are now expelled and are ungovernable because you've already kicked them out, can't punish them any more than you already have. And she was shown to Baylorment. Baylorment is a little shanty town just beyond the horizon, so you can't see it at that time. Now it's actually one of the better suburbs of Ulysses. Ulysses has grown around it. They've reintegrated. Everything's pretty much hunky-dory now. They're all techs again. But that's way, way in the future. That's 8th Fleet, like in the future. And of course, Get Good as well, which I'm currently working on. And she was unceremoniously dumped into the mud of Baylorment and told if she comes back in the city, she'll be violently expelled. We all know what those marks mean. It means you've been expelled for disloyalty. And she's like, really? Because I was never once accused of disloyalty. I was accused of blasphemy. And the texts are like, blasphemy doesn't exist, and neither do you. Enjoy your stay in Baylorment, however long it lasts. And they get in their carriages and roll out. When you are expelled, the first thing you need to do is the essentials: food, water, shelter. The people there have sponsors. They damn well know that what's going on with these people. But they also damn well know that if they do anything other than quietly help you survive by sponsoring you, they will be accused of disloyalty as well, or aiding and abetting the disloyal. If you don't immediately get shelter, food, water, you're going to die of exposure. A lot of people in ancient Balamut would just sit there, just staring out into the void, 1,000-yard stares, like, what the fuck now? The only civilization that they know and trust has just kicked them out for asking a very good question. Is the king a murderer? The answer is yes, but that's problematic. So the answer is actually no. No, he's not. There are 5 lights, Picard. And so, as time went on, Balamut became larger and larger. Eventually, sponsors became more bold. They would give them weapons. Not good weapons, just enough to keep the Eeps out, maybe some bandits. Battlements used in the war against the Norks, now decommissioned. Put up a wall, kept the Eeps out even better. Also, kept assholes like the Bandit King and his Knights of Banditry out, because even though they killed the Bandit King, his knights were expelled from Balamut, ironically. Not welcome anywhere, even in Balamut, was the term. So, your other long-term chance of survival, if you don't have sponsors, Lady Eos, eventually she would become a Lady Eos. She would be the Queen Mother. Not to Voss, though, to his son. And we're getting to his son, I promise. She had a rich family. And as such, she immediately was taken care of. Family members went to the palace and asked what happened to her. They said she was expelled. It's like, okay. Don't ask further questions. Don't ask further questions. She was expelled. So you know where she is. If she's alive, she's in Balamut. Everyone knew Balamut existed. It's just the context under which it existed was gaslit to the people. They were of the opinion that these people are disloyal. And disloyalty in Tech Nation, which is largely based on samurai culture, you don't fucking do that. It's like, no. It's us against the Baelors. We can't have you be disloyal. Like, you're no better than the Baelors then. You're worse than the Baelors because you're here amongst us. You're an imperator. You're trying to corrode us from the inside out. So get lost. That's why so many people were okay with expulsion. Is that blasphemy isn't a law that technically exists. It's a statutory law. Originally, it was just a fine. Someone said shit about the Triarchy, they would get a finger wag and a fine. They upped it to a capital offense, so they could run you out of town. Now, Voss fell into a death spiral of racism and paranoia. In spite of the fact that he completely soured his relationship with the Trox, he would still often consume their whiskey. He would purchase their cigars and tobacco. Like nothing happened. The hypocrisy that this man lived in on a daily basis is unfathomable to most people. Because you need to understand that he basically broke the day he met the King of Octon. It broke him. And from that day forth, it's all about war. We need more people. How do we do that? Don't fucking know. You're going to force people to fuck? I mean, what are you going to do? Yeah, what are you going to do? Techs plan for their children. They understand the concept of contraception, even back in this day, which, disgustingly enough, were sea sponges and Eep intestines tied off at one end. Use your imagination. But they planned for their children. They schooled their children. They wanted quality over quantity. And so telling them you need to have a buttload of kids, like a truck farmer, they're going to be like, Are you going to pay for them, sire? Are you going to take them to school? It's like, yeah. Like, no. How about you fuck off with that? This is the first time where the Triarchy started really, really having conspiratorial machinations against their own people. Like, almost eugenic levels of machinations. They really, really desperately wanted to spike the birth rate. They just couldn't figure out how to do it. Because the Norks outnumber them 3-1, the Trox outnumber them 5-1. However, the Trox are an enemy they made. But they're not even enemies. They still do business with you. It's like, you could mend this wound if you wanted to. The problem is pride. And the problem is instability. Techs like stability. They don't want a government like the Old Republic that just flies apart at the seams. So they figure a tyrannical Triarchy is better than a corrupt Senate. In reality, they both suck, just in different ways. Voss had one son. His name, originally, legally, when he was hatched, was Voss McGowan II. Now, one of the main innovations the Voss pushed forth was investigating different ways to kill people. As weird as that sounds, they basically wanted to make a guild of assassins. But the problem is that there's really no way to like hone assassin skills without killing people. So one way is to get creative with executions. One of the executionary devices that the young Prince Voss II was exposed to, and again, play on my own name, can't help it, it was a wrench which fits around the forehead and has a long steel handle and a wooden T-post to grab. And once it locks onto your head or at the temples and wraps around, just like a strap wrench, you just and turn their head backwards, instantly separating the spinal cord internally. This was referred to as the Allen. And yes, it is an Allen wrench. Dark humor. I was really drunk when I wrote that, like several decades ago. But I do have some lore behind it. Allen and Etos, which is another defunct language the Panjians mostly don't speak anymore, means to see an enlightenment, to see a new angle on something, to look at something from a new way. Say 180 degrees backwards, a new direction of looking. So even its name is kind of a dark joke. But through different means of execution, various poisons were offered to prisoners, some of which were taken voluntarily, some of which were taken involuntarily. They derived basically a book of lethality. Where do you strike on the body to cause it to death? What types of poisons are most effective and leave no trace? If they do leave a trace, what are they? Can they be identified if they're used against us? Through the executions of various prisoners, they derived a book of death that the Assassin's Guild of Ulysses still has and still references to this day, and it has been expanded upon. Like literally like the Wikipedia joke, you could help by expanding it. Each subsequent generation through warfare has added to this book of lethality of how to kill efficiently. Voss then started and funded an Assassin's Guild, and he started the Ranger Enforcement Corps. Now he did this, one, because he wanted a group of Army Rangers which exclusively answer to him and to the McGowans. And he also wanted a group of basically by assassins by other names. This was the era of the Triarchy where they use euphemism. So they're not state-sponsored headhunters and assassins. They are Ranger enforcers. Unlike the civil enforcers, they have one job and they do it very, very well. They find you and they kill you. And they bring back your head for identification and payment. Troc outlaws in the subsequent years, which Trocs would come into Usalices, or Old Town as they called it, and hang out with the techs on occasion, go to bars, restaurants, especially merchants. They would tend to go to the restaurants before leaving in their caravans. Like, they very much added to the economy of Usalices while also extracting from it. It was a give and take. After the Tetric massacre, more young Trocs were inclined to just say, steal shit and then leave town. Or murder someone and leave town. Because they no longer saw, after what Voss did, the Tech's legal system as legitimate. And because so many people were outlawing themselves and not showing up to court, well, Voss is like, well, I guess we'll go have to find them, won't we? So he started the Ranger Enforcement Corps. Very shortly after the Harvest Day incursion as well. And basically, Ranger Enforcers are under law enforcement, which, in spite of the Tetric massacre, the Sheriff's Department of Tetric was still okay with reciprocity for outlaws to a certain extent. They would very much prefer that you tell us who you're looking for and we'll get them, because they always bring them in alive. Ranger Enforcers don't give a shit. Like, as you see in the beginning of Revenge of the Forsaken, Fearsome Cockerel and Veto, they find out where you're hiding, and when you're completely unawares, they kill you. And then they take your head back, again, to identify the corpse and for payment, as proof of death. Now, Voss worked himself to death, essentially, trying to increase the lethality, efficiency, and size of the Tech military. Gearing up for potentially what he saw was a war on two fronts with the Commonwealth and Octon. So, at his funeral, a very young Voss Galwan II was coronated, which was unusual because most of the time you retire to be the king father. You don't die and then get coronated at the funeral. While there, standing next to him, was his father's most trusted right-hand man, Cubic. He was in full honor guard gear, and he was the one who took the crown off the dead king's head and put it on equivalent biological age, probably be like 11 or 12, to Voss McGowan II. He then proceeded to praise the young king, got everyone to cheer for him at the funeral, and then he said his last words to his dead king. It's like, I will never forgive you for what you made me do in Tetric. But I look forward to a future where your son learns from your mistakes. Now, from Cubic's point of view, harsh words at a funeral, but honest. The new king didn't see it that way. The crowd didn't see it that way. Holding back tears of anger, the new king, soon to be Galwan II, looked up at Cubic and said, Cubic, report to the dungeon this instant. I will deal with you after the funeral. He was expelled as well. Now, after his expulsion, Cubic made it his personal mission to reinstate a new republic and to overthrow the Triarchy. He did not believe in the legitimacy of the Triarchy anymore after being ordered to murder a bunch of Trox and after having to hold that in this whole time, hold his tongue, and after seeing the Triarchy go along with covering it up, and after them seeing expel hundreds of people, he finally just had to say something. And that was the time he chose to do it. He was really, really hoping that his relationship with the young prince, now the king, would pay off, and that he would just be pardoned and stripped of his title, and he could still live his life as a free man. That didn't happen. The second he got to Bailorment and was thrown into the mud of Bailorment, he got back up, and everyone there recognized him. That you're King Voss's honor guard. You're head of his honor guard. You're a warder. Like, what the hell, man? And then Kubik said, Voss is a murderer, and his son is a tyrant for covering it up. I have no loyalty to the Triarchy. In fact, I despise them, and I will make it my mission to destroy them. So, from that point on, Kubik was a hardcore Republican. He praised republicanism, even though it failed miserably the first time, and he got a cult following of people who would come from South Usalyces to hear him lecture about how bad the Triarchy is. He became a martyr for the expelled. And to this day, in Bailorment, he is praised as a cultural icon. Even though his hands are not clean either. He says that he was just following orders. But that you don't have to obey unlawful orders. You could have told the king, Sire, we're not doing that. We're leaving. And what was Voss going to do? Start fighting his own men? That's what should have happened, but it didn't. So now you have a very young king on the throne with two elder triarchs. First thing he did after expelling Kubik was have a cup of coffee, and then he asked Kolk to legally change his name to Alan Voss Gowan II. Drop the Mika. And Kolk's like, okay, it's your right. It's like, what do you want us to call you now? It's like, we used to call you Vossi when you were younger. It's like, call me Al. He later would surround himself with individuals that are incredibly lethal. He would constantly pal around with Ranger enforcers. You see that in Revenge of the Forsaken. If Gowan II's nearby, Cockrell and Veto are standing on either side of him. Not warders. Because he learned that day that your most trusted warder will turn on you even at your own damn funeral. But your assassins, who you raise like children, who are indoctrinated since hatching, who make their money off of the silver you put into their bank accounts for bringing back severed heads, they're loyal. They'll kill for you. They'll die for you. He created a new class of people in between the military and the warders. Because the warders still do their job. They always have. Dispassionate, loyal to every triarch that ascends. But after Kubik's betrayal, Gowan II didn't trust them anymore. If you ever notice, in the palace, when Gowan II's roaming around, he doesn't have warders either side of him. He doesn't trust them. They're always around the corner, don't be wrong. They're always within earshot. But who does he stand next to, closely, where they could literally stab you in the back if they wanted to. Ranger enforcers. People who he knows are absolutely loyal. They are not multi-generational warders, or I should say multi-administration warders, holdovers from the previous king. They're not riffraff like Kulik's civil enforcers. That could just be anyone who passes the exams. These guys are hardcore loyalists. Because if they're not loyal, they'll be put on trial for murder. Because they've murdered so many people in your name. And that started the Black Army era. It didn't start when Galactic II started instituting policy to make the army larger, which we're going to go over that next one. We're already at 3 hours. This ran long, sorry. But you need to fully understand what happened before to understand the full context of the Black Army era and later Revenge of the Forsaken that happened right afterwards. Galactic II is a very complex character. He is by no means a good king. But he is a person that did at the moment what felt like what needs to be done. And history judges him harshly, but he's still one of the most memorable kings. And I really wish I wouldn't leave you on such a cliffhanger, because I know I've been building up, but just like I said, just like the villain arc of like the Spider-Man comic book series, the good villains are at the end. You got to build up to it. The Triarchy didn't start out this bad. It was a slow burn. But it's about to get really interesting for the next stream. And I'd like to thank everyone. It looks like I had I just kept the analytics screen up this time. I didn't try to look at my direct OBS, which is what screened me last time. Seems to have a message redacted. I think that's a bot. But hey, at least the clankers are paying attention. But it looks like I had 3 consecutive views. That's probably friends and family. I would like to really thank you for listening in. Probably only listened for a little bit and then got bored and left. Totally understandable. I tend to ramble. Other than from interference from my cat, really good live stream tonight. Hope you liked my little animatic in the background. Literally took me 5 minutes to make. In case you're wondering, each one of these seals here, the circles is Kulik, 3 keys, although I covered that in the Thursday night hangout when I actually was drawing this. And of course, the Zion swooping down between trees forming an M is the McGowans. And like I said, this is the Triarchal Addressment Perch, where so many speeches and addressments to the press. A lot of people didn't come to the center courtyard for addressments. It was mainly journalists. And Galactic II especially despised that because they acted sort of like a go-between between him and the people. He always wished there was a way that he could directly address the people, and he figured out a way. It's just kind of devious. But we're not going to get into that now. Like I said, we're at 3 hours, and my throat's dry, and yeah, I think it's just time to leave off. So, next one, next Sunday. Oh boy, are you going to get it. One of my favorite insert characters, Alan Voss Gowan II. Oh yeah, it's Zark Kulik and Bevan Colt too. Those guys. Yeah. Alright.